I humiliated my cheating wife after collecting the evidence and kicked her out to the streets. I met a girl in college while working at a specific office supply store chain back in 2011. It started as an innocent crush between the two of us, then eventually evolved into a bit of fooling around both on and off work premises. I knew I liked her, and that she liked me, and the chemistry was through the roof between us. I also had my reservations because she was known as the easiest F in the whole job, and had sexual encounters with 3 of my coworkers. She came on to me strong, and I knew she was easy and just wanted a chance with her. But then it developed into more. I had been fairly inexperienced sexually at the time, and she was opening up a whole new world to me, and was honestly the first girl to ever be that sexually interested in me. I felt like a king because for the first time in life, I had a girl who didn't just have feelings for me. She wanted to jump my bones all the time, and would often stroke my ego about how amazing I was in bed and the best lover she's ever had. On top of that, we were best friends, had everything in common, and had a bond that neither of us had ever experienced before. It was an incredible start. This went on for a while until I finally made things official with her. We continued to fool around inside and outside of work, and things were great until the newness started to slow down. At about the 6-month mark of our relationship, I noticed her sexual energy was kind of off. The dirty talk stopped, the enthusiasm subsided, and while her feelings for me were clearly getting stronger, we were saying I love you by then, the sexual chemistry died down a bit. I chalked it up to the fact that couples grow out of the honeymoon phase and start to settle into a sustainable routine. I was in decent shape at the time, treating her well and doing what would be considered necessary as the foundation of good sex and chemistry. We still had sex when we could, but it just wasn't as magical as it had once been due to her declining interest. At the time, we weren't living together, and she would often promise me that if we lived together, things would be different. This is where I began to start chasing the dragon, so to speak. I eventually brought up the issue again to her when I noticed things still weren't improving, and told her it was important to me and something I felt I needed to not only feel connected with her on a deeper level, but also as a man. It feels good to know you are wanted and needed by your partner, both physically and emotionally. She said it was nothing, and essentially she hadn't noticed a change. She told me things were fine and that she was just growing up. She considered her previous sexual energy as immature, and that she isn't the type anymore to be all over a dude like that. We still continued to have sex once a week, sometimes more, but it was never quite the same. Occasionally, she would revive some of that old enthusiasm on vacations, or times where she was particularly horny. In addition to our declining sex life, I started to notice little red flags, which were ultimately ignored in the long run, like her not being super generous, not being thoughtful as a partner. She had a habit of taking but not giving, and had no interest in doing anything to strengthen our relationship. She became complacent, lazy, combative, disrespectful, secretive, and generally took me for granted. Our first big blowout was over something I saw on her phone under the Whisper app. The Whisper app is essentially a place where you can make anonymous statements out into the ether with no consequences since there is no identifying information. One thing she posted was, "I want to F my professor so badly." Someone replied to her message in a DM and said, "Just do it." She responded with, "I'm trying, huh?" I confronted her about this and almost broke up with her over it, but stupidly decided to forgive her. This started a long trend of finding incriminating evidence in her phone. I should note that she had a rough childhood and had been diagnosed with depression and anxiety. I always took this into consideration, but couldn't excuse bad decision-making and overall being a bad girlfriend just because of the diagnosis, especially since I went above and beyond to give her all the love, support, and literally anything else she needs, in hopes of her maybe feeling inspired to reciprocate in her own way. I tried everything, spending more money, more dates, massages, foot rubs, home-cooked meals every night, words of affirmation, vacations, sex toys, BDSM, something she mentioned wanting to try, and to no avail. She just wasn't digging any of it. Despite all of this, my career was progressing well, my salary was getting bigger, and I started to get serious about the future, marriage, kids, etc., and I decided at around 5 years together to move in. It started out okay, and for a moment felt like we were getting into a groove and that our sex lives were improving. She was more helpful around the house. She eventually stopped complimenting me, only had sex with me if I asked, usually once a week or when she noticed I was being kind of irritable. We became very stagnant and I was internally miserable, knowing that she essentially brought nothing to the table. Financially, I was the breadwinner and paying for mostly everything, didn't work, to improve our home life, and could care less if I was being satisfied, despite having all her needs met and having an incredible support system. I kept trying to do my best and one-upping myself, went on self-improvement journeys, tried to communicate more, and kept giving. She would say she's trying, but it was always in a way that was the least amount of effort and bare minimum, and would complain that nothing was ever good enough for me. Forgetting to do anything for my birthday, no sex on Valentine's Day despite giving her the works, coming home to her being off of work all week in a dirty house, while the first thing she asked me is what's for dinner. I was becoming exhausted with her and felt like a parent, not a partner. She ignored everything as usual and kept chugging along, thinking my life is this way because I'm not good enough. I need to improve in every way so she can finally see that I'm deserving of love and affection and that I'm worth putting effort into. My self-esteem was nothing at this point, and I eventually decided that the only way to fix this and finally get the girl I fell in love with back was to marry her. Insert facepalm here. I was still holding on to the sporadic moments of affection, the hope of better days, and the fact that if she was everything I needed before that, improving myself and her life can bring her back. In 2019, we finally tied the knot and had a beautiful destination wedding in Jamaica where I told everyone who ever knew us that she's the one and we will be together forever. This is where our relationship started to take a turn for even worse. Because our relationship spanned over 10 years, it's hard to put it all here. I will follow up with a part 2 and explain how the cheating started and how everything eventually led to nasty divorce. Sorry for the wall of text. Alright, Mac John 77 says, this story is an absolute train wreck. You start dating a girl because the sex is great. Eventually the sex dies down and she starts being less affectionate. So you move in with her? Then this continues and escalates and you find evidence of her either cheating or at least wanting to cheat. So you marry her? At a certain point, I have to start taking the blame off of her. She showed you who she really is, repeatedly. You just chose not to believe her. Opie replies, for sure, man. 6 months later, I get it now and obviously, see what you mean. Young, dumb, insecure, and inexperienced. Trust me, I know after a certain point it was my fault for ignoring red flags and pushing forward. Let's go to part 2 and 3. So after our massive destination wedding and tens of thousands of dollars spent on an elaborate display of love, things didn't immediately decline. They actually improved a little. We spent the next few months in what felt like a mini honeymoon phase as we enjoyed the new title and presenting ourselves to our friends and loved ones as the couple that had made it. It felt like we had a fresh start. And while things weren't perfect, I saw her starting to try a little more. She was slightly more affectionate, a little more enthusiastic during sex, helping around the house, and with bills a lot more. She eventually decided she wanted to go back to school so that she could make more money and contribute more. And I agreed to take care of the bills while she used the money from her part-time job to pay for her school. It was at this point that the micro-cheating started to pick back up. The micro-cheating. 2014, before marriage. She posted a comment on an anonymous app explaining how badly she wanted to F her professor and confessed on said app that she was actively trying to do so. I forgave her. 2015, before marriage. A video was sent to a female ex-girlfriend of hers via email of her masturbating. She claimed to have not sent it and that it was a 6-year-old video despite having been sent the month prior. 2016, before marriage. I joked around with her one day and said via text, I know what you did. Don't try and lie about it either. I knew she watched one of our Netflix shows without me. She then confessed and said she didn't mean anything by it and nothing happened between them. I was obviously shocked and didn't expect any of that to come out. She was hanging out with and flirting with an old friend from high school who clearly had feelings for her. We'll call him Jacob. She claimed nothing happened. I forgave her. 2017, before marriage. I saw a message between her and her group chat friends at work saying how her favorite sexual position is riding. In our personal life, she would tell me she hated riding, and we rarely ever did it in the 10 years we spent together. In 2018, I started noticing that she was a lot more sexually active behind closed doors than she was with me, except for the occasional vacation, and even vacations were hit or miss. She started buying sex toys. Noticed she was regularly watching porn and masturbating more often the moment I would leave the house. I have no issues with this. However, as you can imagine, I was hoping that somehow that would translate to something in our bedroom, and it never did. Despite my best efforts to create a safe space for us to enjoy sex together, for her, sex with me was a chore, a labor of love, something to pacify me and keep me manipulated. If she wanted her needs met, she would rather handle it herself, even when I offered to be a student, learn her body more, and learn how to please her in the way she needed. She continued to decline my offers and stood her ground, saying, "What you do already is fine. I'm good. I don't need all of that." 2019, 4 months before the wedding. I noticed her starting to become friendly with coworkers at her new job. This wasn't a problem, but they were a group of immature party girls that were dealing with a lot of situationships, according to her stories with them. I would often drop her off and pick her up from work to make things easier for her, so I eventually got to learn a lot about her coworkers. However, there was a particular gentleman at her job that seemed to have a lot of attention from the ladies at work. We will call him Jason. Jason was a good-looking guy, on the shorter side but very fit, muscles and all, and many ladies at the job were willing to be a side chick to him since he had a girlfriend. One day, I came across a message to her friend at work explaining to her how hot she thought he was, how she's obsessed with his abs, and she thinks that Jason is going to get her in trouble with her fiancé one day. I confronted her and took the brunt of the blame for invading her privacy. However, the one time every few months that I would snoop through her phone, there was always something incriminating there. I never enjoyed looking through her phone because I knew I would always find something. We moved past that incident and still got married. In 2020, things started to decline as her mental health started to take a hit from the stressors she had in life. School, work, me, and my constant requests for improvement and for us to work together to make our lives better. The first thing that got me considering the idea of leaving was our first wedding anniversary. She didn't bother getting me a gift despite me getting a homemade gift for her and treating her to a day full of activities and a nice dinner. That night, she apparently decided that my gift was going to be sex, and she laid on the bed and with the most begrudging voice ever she said, "Come on, hurry up and get it over with." I declined. The next day when I confronted her about the lack of gift and her negative approach towards initiating sex, she got defensive and said, "I forgot. Okay? I just didn't think about it. And in regards to the sex, nothing is ever good enough for you. Everything I do is wrong somehow." She began being a little more complacent. And while she was like a best friend to me, she lacked a lot of the characteristics that would make us feel like more than roommates. Friends with occasional benefits at best. We always got along when it came to things unrelated to our relationship, but I always felt like I was getting the bare minimum from her and constantly starving for love, affection, and sex. She used this to her advantage often and would attempt to use sex as an apology or get out of jail free card whenever I brought up an issue to her. Things chugged along, and we continued going through the motions. We were on vacations, activities, adventures, dinners, you name it. And it was still always just a watered-down version of the person I truly knew her to be. She was my best friend, but I started having trouble seeing a happy future with her. 2021, after marriage. I broke down one day after coming home randomly with my brother, catching her masturbating to a picture of Jason after we hadn't had sex in almost a month. I told her it made me feel unwanted, and it hurt to feel like I'm being deprived because you are focusing your sexual energy on him by yourself. She denied it, said it's not like that, and that she still needs me and what I have to offer, and attempted to be the best version of herself for me for about a week in order to bring me back in. I fell for it. Not too long after this, her mental health took a turn for the worst and she admitted herself into a psych ward. I came and visited her every day after work for 3.5 weeks straight, sat with her in the mandatory therapy sessions, and even brought her favorite foods and snacks when she didn't like the lunch offered that day. I believed if she can overcome her depression and get the correct treatment and therapy that she would be a better person for me and our relationship would improve as a result. It did not. 2022, after marriage. This is when everything officially went to crap. Notice that she is spending a lot more time with our friends and partying and having fun. There was also a trend of being really casually dressed when we went out, but being dressed to impress when she went out with her coworkers. She also developed a new habit of posting overly sexual memes and text posts that were vague, but still clearly had nothing to do with me based on her current sex life. I would question her about it when she would reference things like she loves in the bedroom in these story posts, and I would ask, "Is that something you enjoy? I can do that for you if you like." And she would just kind of dismiss it, feeling as if I was trying to control what she does on her social media. Not too long after this, I'm cleaning under our bed and I find a massive dildo, and I mean massive. I told her it made me uncomfortable that you were using it based on her lack of sex life, and she claimed that she has never used it before. I moved on, but as you can imagine, it left me with a very weird insecure feeling that just never sat right with me. At this point in my life, my career was going well. I had side hustles and passive income streams set up and had started to become a little more consumed with work. However, always set aside entire days and weekends for us to spend together doing something she loved, and I would always spoil her and try to take care of her emotional needs the best I can. I got really into NFTs at the time, and during a week-long NFT convention, I spent a lot of time out that week networking and meeting people from the space. I'm not usually that guy. I'm usually home doing something nerdy and really only went out with my wife and my boys occasionally. However, that week I was out late almost every day, and let her know ahead of time that this was going to be the case and that it would only be temporary, even going as far as to invite her to all of the events I was able to get her into. One morning, I was out late for the Bored Ape Yacht party and was communicating with her the entire time, giving her my timeline and when I planned to arrive home. I found it odd that she was up until 2 a.m. still texting back when she usually went to sleep early. Went home that night, found her still up and didn't think much about it. We both eventually fell asleep. The next morning I notice she isn't in bed. She sometimes gets up before me, and I get woken up by the sounds of her Apple Watch buzzing frantically with text messages. I look over and see it's from a group message with her coworker and a number saved as Tim Bumble. I opened up the text from her and discovered they were speaking with a gentleman named Tim from the dating app Bumble who looked like a supermodel and sent them multiple pictures proving just how well endowed he was. Both my wife and her coworker were clearly interested in him, as I was hit with a long string of messages between the three of them planning a threesome for the following weekend. In addition to that, nudes were contributed to the group text by each party member, and there was even a side conversation between my wife and him outside of the group chat where she expressed her personal interest in his member and the things she wanted to do to him. I officially lost my crap, and things didn't just go downhill from there. They went off a freaking cliff. Edit. Part 3 since it was removed. So after finding a mountain of incriminating evidence against her, I gathered my thoughts and proceeded to confront her with A. Who the EFF is Tim? She told me that it was her coworker's friend and that she was putting on an act with him in order to help her coworker out. Apparently her coworker really liked the guy, met him on Bumble, and wanted my wife's help at seducing him into a threesome. The plan was to set up the threesome. My wife would bail at the last minute, and Tim and the coworker would be together alone to complete the deed. This was the most idiotic thing I ever heard. Obviously, I was frustrated by the betrayal of her being completely inappropriate behind my back, but it was also the fact that she displayed a type of energy towards this stranger in those messages that I had been trying to receive from her for years. She claimed she was incapable, claimed her sex drive wasn't what it used to be, and that dirty talk made her feel uncomfortable. But here she was contradicting herself in every single way possible. We cooled off for a bit, and I went to a friend's house for 2 days to clear my head and figure out the next steps. We were a week away from going on a 7-day cruise we had planned prior, and I was trying to figure out what to do about it. She obviously apologized profusely and admitted it was dumb to ruin her marriage over helping a friend EFF a stranger. She started the process of trying to temporarily be the world's best wife for the next week, sending me lunch through Uber Eats with love messages, helping out around the house, trying to be sweet and affectionate, and offering me sexual favors. One particular night, we had really great, mind-blowing emotional sex that reminded me of our earlier sex life, and it made me feel like this was the push she needed to get back into that headspace with me again. If this is what she will be like moving forward, then I could possibly move past things and start rebuilding trust again. So I forgave her and tried to move forward, even deciding to take her on the cruise with me. The cruise went all right for the first few days as I tried to keep my mind off things and enjoy the new effort she was putting in and the person she was trying to be for me, but it kept eating me up inside. Eventually, about 4 days in, I cracked and looked through her phone again to see if there was any evidence I was missing out on. To be honest, I didn't really find much other than a conversation with said coworker vaguely commenting on the issues of our relationship based on a conversation they must have had prior. Apparently, she felt that there were issues and problems in the relationship leading to this that she felt comfortable telling her friends and coworkers, but never to me, even when we set time aside for weekly communication sessions. We argued about it, and she broke down crying and stayed in the cabin for the rest of the day, frustrated that I will never get over this and nothing she does will ever be good enough to fix it. The rest of the cruise was quiet and awkward as we tried to make the best of the situation, but the vibe just wasn't the same. When we got back, we started to discuss couples therapy and ways for us to build back up the trust and spark in our relationship. She agreed, and I started looking up therapists and asking for her to do the same. She dragged her feet and never got around to the task despite spending hours scrolling on Instagram daily. Eventually, we found therapy we could afford and started doing sessions, but it was pointless since she put zero thought or effort into any of it and treated it all like a chore. Eventually, I snapped one day during our session, frustrated that she wasn't taking it seriously, frustrated that she didn't even help source the therapy for the problem she created, and even decided to post a funny meme that day about being in a threesome and not knowing what to do. Great meme, really funny, just a little too close to home. At this point, she was all out of effort and completely complacent and devoid of all giving a crap. She began doubling down on the partying and began hanging out and talking to Jason more, spending a lot more time portraying herself as a promiscuous woman on social media and denying a lot of my sexual advances. I stopped planning trips with her or anything for the future because of how weird and uncertain things were. We spent a few months in a weird twilight space where we just went with the flow as roommates, not working on the issues at hand and trying to ignore the dying relationship. It was at this point I started noticing her and Jason getting closer. She'd always mentioned that he was a cool dude and they had similar interests, smoking weed, gaming, anime, etc. I understood why they were cool, and she would say things like, "He's short, he has a girlfriend, we're just friends." Nothing more, and I would accept it since I didn't have proof otherwise. I continued to snoop through her phone and didn't find anything incriminating other than walking to the train together after work and smoking weed on their lunch breaks. I told her based on recent events that alone time with him makes me uncomfortable, and I prefer if you not hang out with him alone outside of work. She agreed and assured me it would stop. A month later, I asked if she is still hanging out with him despite the picture being sent from him to her of her walking down the street. I don't know the reference behind this picture, and she claimed not to know why he sent it either. She assured me nothing was going on and sent me a screenshot of her text messages with him, which were few and far between over the course of the last few months, essentially saying that they barely communicate. One Sunday morning, she had plans for brunch with her friends, and she was dressed stunning. Of course, I had already felt like she put more effort into her appearance when going out with friends than with me, but I saw she was happy and excited for the day, and I tried to just internalize it. She noticed I was a little off and asked me, "What's going on with you? You seem upset about something." I told her how I felt, and she proceeded to cry, saying I always have to find a way to ruin her fun and put her down. "It's like you see me being happy about it, go have fun, and try to take it away from me before I go." That was never the case for me, and I explained that to her, but it fell on deaf ears, and she just left upset. She ignored my texts and calls the rest of the day as I tried to gauge when she was coming back home. My cousin was admitted to the hospital the day before, and I wanted to use the car to see her. She never responded. I ended up falling asleep waiting for her to come home around midnight, only to wake up when she drunkenly stumbles into bed and passes out with all her clothes on from the night before. She refuses to answer any of my questions and falls asleep. Me being upset and unable to sleep, I went into the living room to sleep. I noticed something fall out of her jacket pocket and saw it was a throat spray she had apparently purchased that night. It was still in the packaging, and she keeps all of her receipts. I never brought it up to her as I didn't know how to. In the morning, I asked her what happened that night, and she said she got really drunk and was upset with me and wanted her space. She also told me that she decided to do coke that night for the first time. Neither of us had ever tried it because her friend really wanted some, and she tried to bump off a random dealer in the middle of the park to test it before purchasing. I freaked out and told her it was idiotic and irresponsible, and she could have died, but she brushed it off and told me I'm always mad about something. 2 days later on Yom Kippur, I went to work to see most people had decided to work from home that day. I wasn't aware that the holiday was that day and thought it back to earlier in the morning. My wife was getting ready for school as I was getting ready for work and was prepared to head into class. After realizing that she went to a public college and shouldn't have class that day, I called her to find out where she was. She never answered and instead texted me telling me she found out there was no class when she got there and was headed back home. It was around 12 p.m. I told her to call me ASAP. She took 2 hours to do so, saying she was on the train. I didn't feel comfortable about it, and later at home asked her to promise me she was telling the truth. I noticed that night in her phone that her coworker had texted her, "How did it go?" to which she called her and spoke with her for 20 minutes. The following morning, I noticed her drawer was open and I saw something familiar, the deep throat spray, and what I thought was the associated receipt. However, this time the throat spray was not in its original packaging and had clearly been used. The receipt next to it was actually for a McDonald's drive-thru order nowhere near our apartment or her school around the time she said she was on the train. I confronted her, and she assured me it wasn't her receipt and that she just tested out the spray. She also tried to convince me that she bought it for me and her to use, despite never telling me this and purchasing it on a night where she claimed to be mad at me. I asked her about what her coworker meant about how did it go, how did what go, and what did you guys talk about if there was no school that day. She dismissed it as her and her coworker just catching up. A month later, I found myself going through the phone records online trying to locate a number I had called in the past for tax help and realized that I was able to see who texts me and who I have texted going back months prior. I couldn't see the content of the texts, but I was able to see who sent what to who and when. Instantly, I decided to look under her phone records since I was the primary account holder. I noticed that she had been texting a certain number back and forth for months. I go to her phone to try to locate the contact, and lo and behold, it's Jason. Thousands of messages between them over the course of 3 months, none of which were reflected in the empty screenshot of her messages with him, meaning she must have been deleting everything as she goes. I was furious and confronted her. Prior to this, she told me she had no one to talk to about her problems and her world was falling apart because she had no support system like I did with my friends, despite how close she had seemed to get to her coworkers. When I confronted her about Jason, she finally admitted that they had become close and he was like one of her closest friends and that they confided in each other about their individual relationships and that it was platonic otherwise. She eventually also admitted that she had saw him that day on Yom Kippur when she went to school and that they still hang out outside of work. I was furious. This was the final straw, and I told her if you really like him that much, you should be with him. She yelled back frustrated, saying that she doesn't even like him like that, and nothing she said would get me to believe her. Claimed I was being jealous for no reason, and that their friendship doesn't threaten us in any way. I couldn't trust her anymore and didn't believe anything she said obviously, so I reached out to Jason. I asked Jason if he was effing my wife, to which he claimed no, he wasn't. They just talk and hang out sometimes. He doesn't keep any records of their messages because he has a girlfriend and doesn't want any drama by saving texts with female coworkers. Claimed he doesn't mess with girls at work as a personal rule and apologized to me, telling me that, as a man, "I'm sorry you're going through this." I didn't know what to believe. I thanked him for the honesty and proceeded to tell my wife to leave the apartment for a few days while I packed my stuff. I packed, I cried. I said goodbye to my cats and goodbye to her, and proceeded to go to my father's house after the most traumatic final goodbye I had ever experienced. We were both devastated to see where we currently were after all we had been through and how far we had come. All I wanted was to go back to better days, but I couldn't stop thinking about the lying, the mistrust, the laziness, and the complete void left in me by being in such a toxic, unsatisfying relationship for so long. I became a shell of myself.
One evening, I sat at our table going through my daughter Katie's medical forms. Katie was preparing to start kindergarten, so she had a thorough checkup from the pediatrician. Meanwhile, my wife left her school forms spread out on the table. Glancing lazily at them, I noticed a letter that marked the end of my marriage. In the blood type column, it read A. I froze for about 10 seconds, utterly clueless. I then went to the cabinet and fetched 2 sheets of paper from our medical records. Everything matched my recollection perfectly. Last summer, both my wife and I donated blood to the Red Cross, receiving receipts indicating our blood type. Here they were on 2 sheets of paper. Mine was B, hers was O. So Katie couldn't possibly be my daughter. If my wife was her mother and I witnessed Marie giving birth, then someone with blood type A had to be the father. The kids were already asleep, and Marie was upstairs watching TV. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat in the backyard contemplating the state of my marriage. I'd say it was okay, pretty average, with its fair share of ups and downs. When we were dating and in the early stages of marriage, Marie and I were deeply in love. We were carnal all the time, sometimes passionately, even outside of the bedroom. We were always touching, holding hands, walking side by side, caressing each other as we passed by. Naturally, over time, that faded. Isn't that how it goes in most marriages? But now, faced with undeniable proof of her infidelity, everything I thought about our marriage was shaken. I pondered, what changed? Was it gradual or sudden? It felt like both. The decline in our closeness was gradual initially. However, about 6 years ago, a few months before Katie was conceived, things took a strange turn. Marie, typically warm and loving, started acting oddly. One evening, she came home from work very late, allowed me a brief tender kiss, then hurried to the shower and avoided me for the rest of the night. The next morning was just as chilly and distant. But that night, she was a different person entirely. She came home early, cooked a special dinner, tucked me into bed early, and made love to me with a fervor and passion I thought we'd lost. We cuddled happily before sleep, and Marie expressed her love for me. Several times that week, we shared passionate moments. Then, the coldness returned abruptly. She arrived late from work, didn't utter a word to me, and swiftly disappeared into the shower. For the next 2 months, I hardly recognized the woman I married. Marie was affectionate and distant, attentive and preoccupied, patient and irritable. I asked her numerous times if something was wrong, if there were issues between us or at work. Her only response was to express uncertainty to Bill, admitting that she might just be feeling a bit nervous and apologizing for it. When things eventually settled after about 3 months, it was far from the joyful beginning of our marriage. Marie became less moody, but she was rarely affectionate anymore, and her interest in closeness vanished. We made love no more than once a week, sometimes even less frequently, and only when I insisted firmly. Any gentle suggestion, like maybe we could be carnal tonight, was met with sharp rejection. I had to seriously address the long lapse since our last carnal moment. Marie would reluctantly engage in lovemaking afterward, making it evident she was merely obliging me. Is this dismal pattern common in all marriages? It was the only marriage I carnally knew, so I couldn't say. Naturally, I pondered what was happening, contemplating the possibility of infidelity. However, soon after, Marie became pregnant, and our shared excitement over our future baby and the joy of having our wonderful Katie overshadowed most of my concerns about our relationship. After Katie's birth, we were constantly exhausted, making Marie's disinterest in lovemaking more understandable, though still unsatisfactory to me. Then, when Katie turned 3, Marie became pregnant again, and we welcomed Brian just after Katie's 4th birthday. So Bill and Marie, once passionate lovers and spouses, transitioned into Bill and Marie, parents of 2 delightful, yet exhausting children. We both cherished our kids deeply. Despite my current realization of my profound unhappiness with our marriage and our nearly non-existent lovemaking life, I was oblivious to it at the time. If that was the case, then I concluded that all couples with young children experience this phase. With the startling revelation that my daughter wasn't biologically mine, the events of 6 years ago no longer seemed mysterious. Marie must have initiated an affair around that time. This explained her distant behavior and sudden rush to the shower. The subsequent passionate lovemaking and warmth could be attributed to guilt, or perhaps, if I were being generous, to her attempt to maintain the facade of a happy marriage while continuing the affair. As I sat in the yard, observing the night descend and the stars twinkle, my initial shock gave way to growing anger. Not only had my beloved wife betrayed me, but she had also deceived me into raising someone else's child, and perhaps more than one. If I were solely focused on punishing Marie at that moment, I would have stormed into the house, presented her with the evidence of blood types, coerced a confession, and cast her out onto the street. But it wasn't that simple. I cherished my children, regardless of their biological origins. If we were to divorce, Marie would likely gain sole custody once the truth about their parentage surfaced. I contemplated and asked myself, what do I truly desire? The answers became surprisingly clear. Firstly, I needed to uncover the truth about Marie's actions. Was it a fleeting affair? Was she unaware that Katie wasn't my biological child? Or did she know everything and carry on a clandestine relationship for years? Secondly, I was determined to raise my children as my own and shield them from the knowledge of my non-biological relationship to them. Once I delineated my objectives, devising a plan to achieve them seemed remarkably straightforward. I returned to the house and discreetly collected cotton swabs from each of the children's cheeks while they slept, labeling Katie's with a 2 and Brian's with a 3. Then I headed to the kitchen, swabbed my own cheek, and marked it with a 1. I had a friend who worked in a university chemistry lab, and I arranged for him to conduct DNA tests for me. This marked the initial step, the commencement of gathering crucial information. After receiving my initial response, I knew what to do next. A week later, my friend called me without knowing where the samples came from. I told him about meeting people with the same surname, leading to discussions about potential distant kinship. He then mentioned that Bill's 2 and 3 were siblings, but the first one wasn't related. This revelation indicated that they weren't cousins as previously assumed. I thanked him for the information and ended the call. Katie and Brian were siblings, sharing the same parents. Marie, on the other hand, had 2 children with an unknown partner. Did she have knowledge of this? She must have been aware of her relations with this individual, but was she cognizant of his paternity over our children? There was a straightforward means to ascertain the truth. Approaching Marie as she washed dishes in the kitchen, I brought up the topic without turning towards her. I began by telling her I had a question, and she encouraged me to continue. I explained the situation regarding my colleague's biologist friend needing DNA samples from relatives. I suggested that we obtain swabs from her, me, and each child, planning to handle the kids before bedtime and take care of ours later. I checked Marie's reaction closely as I spoke. In the middle of my explanation, she tensed, almost dropping a pan before composing herself. After I finished, there was a minute of silence before she turned to face me. Marie expressed her doubts about the idea, questioning how we could be certain about what the biologist would do with the samples, or if our privacy would be respected. Despite my attempts to argue, she firmly opposed the idea, insisting that she wasn't interested. She asked me to inform my colleague that we declined to participate. I replied softly, saying it was okay either way. Her reaction conveyed to me what I needed to know. My next step involved uncovering the truth about her affairs. Who, where, when, and perhaps why. Although uncertain, searching her home might yield clues. I required time for a thorough search. On Saturday, we planned to visit her parents. Minutes before departure, I pretended a work crisis, feigned a call, then explained the situation to Marie. She reluctantly agreed, departing with the children. Now, I had hours to comb through the house systematically. I deemed my usual haunts unnecessary to search, focusing instead on Marie's spaces. Skipping the kitchen, bookshelves, and living room, I ignored my own areas but meticulously combed through her closet and dresser. The discovery of hidden lingerie hinted at secrets. Only the children's rooms and the attic remained to explore. Concluding that the children's rooms were less promising, I ventured into the attic. Inside, I found assorted old furniture, a few lamps, and numerous boxes of items predating our marriage. Realizing the enormity of the task, I scrutinized the area. Notably, one of the 3 nearby boxes appeared less dusty and had been recently disturbed. Upon closer inspection, I focused on these 3 boxes and uncovered Marie's old belongings, mostly letters from her college days. Among them were letters and keepsakes from myself, including sweet greeting cards. Buried at the bottom of one box, concealed beneath old papers, lay a thin stack of recent notes and 2 unmarked videotapes. Extracting them, I discovered the tapes contained explicit content, while the notes were from Harry, her office superior, expressing overtly closeness sentiments. After scrutinizing the materials for 20 minutes, it became evident that Marie had betrayed me with Harry, beginning around 3 months before our daughter Katie was conceived, coinciding with Marie's peculiar behavior at home. The notes revealed a dynamic characterized by Harry's dominance and Marie's compliance, devoid of affection. They dictated her attire for various occasions and detailed their carnal encounters during late work hours. Some even ridiculed me for unknowingly raising their children. It was apparent Harry had no intention of acknowledging their paternity. My anger intensified as I realized the extent of Marie's deception, knowing Harry was happily married to Caroline, unaware of his affair. Although Marie seemed to willingly participate, there was no indication of coercion. She appeared to relish her submissive role. They both appeared to know the paternity of Marie's children and seemed to enjoy their secret over me. These revelations confirmed Marie's deceit over the past 6 years, deliberately conceiving children from another man while masquerading as my devoted wife. Filled with rage, I resolved to seek revenge on both Marie and Harry. After a brief moment of contemplation, I brought the tapes to the VCR and watched footage of Harry and Marie engaging in carnal acts. The setting of the earlier recording, likely Harry's house, and the more recent one in our bedroom, raised suspicions about Marie's opportunities during my business trips. Overall, the recordings affirmed Harry's closeness dominance over Marie and her eager compliance. The room's lighting wasn't particularly bright, but both figures were clearly visible, and the sound quality was surprisingly clear, allowing me to catch every word and moan on the initial tape. From the outset of their affair, I heard Harry assuming control. Seated on the bed, he directed Marie to perform a provocative strip-tease, which she did with a smile. The closeness was rough, lacking tenderness or affection, and Harry spoke harshly to her. It saddened me to observe that Marie evidently enjoyed the encounter. The second tape featured similar carnal scenes, but included some fresh, intriguing dialogue as they reclined on the bed. Marie queried Harry about his indifference to me raising his children, to which he responded that I was a decent guy who loved children, and he didn't worry beyond that. He mentioned that if it weren't for that, he would advise her to leave me. Marie retorted by questioning what I was good for besides changing diapers. She expressed to Harry that it wasn't fair. Marie defended me, highlighting my kindness and love, comparing them to Harry's treatment. She hinted at being drawn to Harry's roughness because it contrasted with my gentleness. Despite this, they proceeded with their encounter before Harry's departure. Upon completing both viewings, I pondered their arrogance, not only in creating such evidence, but also in foolishly leaving it along with Harry's notes where I could find them. My retaliation would be comprehensive, targeting both of them. I utilized a scanner to digitize each note onto my hard drive. Then, using software borrowed from work for a previous project, I converted each videotape into a digital file on my hard drive for future editing. Once finished, I stashed the records and tapes in the trunk of my car, concealing them under the spare tire. I then meticulously tidied up the attic, ensuring Marie remained oblivious to my presence. Over the following 2 weeks, I methodically executed my plans. It was much easier than I anticipated to feign normalcy with Marie, acting as if nothing unusual had occurred. It struck me that she had deceived me for 6 years, making it easier for me to reciprocate. Despite lacking any desire for her, I continued to act affectionately, even initiating closeness, albeit cautiously, to make it easier for her to refuse. I truly had no desire to touch her ever again. An important event loomed in Marie's life. She had been elected as the new president of the Key Society, a significant charity in our city, and was set to officially assume office at a luncheon where she would deliver a speech outlining the charity's plans for the upcoming year. Marie had served on the Key Society board for 3 years and felt greatly honored to be named president. Nervous about her presentation, she asked for my assistance in preparing the PowerPoint portion she intended to use. This presented me with a golden opportunity. For about a week, I collaborated with her every evening, allowing her to share her slides and other materials with me, organizing them into a cohesive presentation. She rehearsed this several times in the month leading up to her big day, and it always went smoothly. Concurrently, I prepared my own entirely different PowerPoint presentation, ready to replace hers. The night before the luncheon, I deleted Marie's file and substituted it with mine, adding a lock to prevent her from disabling it once the presentation began. All I needed to ensure was that Mary had extended an invitation to Harry and his wife for dinner. I casually inquired, and she confirmed they would attend on that significant evening. I shared Marie's excitement, though for different reasons. Arriving early, Marie, elegantly clad in a black evening gown, looked stunning. I assisted her in setting up the laptop, conducting a couple of tests to ensure smooth playback. We all relished a fine dinner and some initial speeches. Marie was then warmly introduced by the outgoing president, and she approached the podium with a blend of timidity and pride. As applause erupted, she commenced her speech and launched the PowerPoint presentation. Initially, it unfolded as expected, showcasing images of the society's key charitable endeavors and financial breakdowns. Then, as per my scheme, it abruptly shifted focus. A sequence of still photos followed, frames I extracted from 2 videos depicting a couple engaged in various carnal acts. While some images were dim, the collective impression of a dozen or so unmistakably featured Marie and Harry. For a few minutes, Marie continued addressing key social issues. Then, amid a sudden stir among the audience, she turned to the screen behind her. Gasping, she inadvertently knocked over a glass of water onto the podium, momentarily frozen in shock. Soon, a vivid blush spread across her face and neck as she frantically tried to halt the presentation. By then, still photos had transitioned into brief video clips. Harry's voice rang out as he questioned how they would prevent me from discovering that she was carrying his child. He mentioned that, as long as she allowed me occasional closeness, I wouldn't suspect anything. He added that she should remember that she belonged to him. The room erupted in laughter and jeers from all corners. Marie stood transfixed, utterly dumbfounded, and too stunned to even feel embarrassed. At a nearby table, Caroline, Harry's wife, seized a vase of flowers, smashed it over Harry's head, and exited amidst the commotion. As people gradually vacated the ballroom, they cast glances back at Marie, gesturing and reliving the astonishing spectacle. Surprisingly swiftly, Marie and I were left alone. She stood on the podium, defeated and desolate. Sitting at a table 10 feet away, I grinned broadly as I looked up at her. Eventually, she met my eyes, wearing an expression of profound sorrow. She questioned how I could betray her and stated that she thought I loved her, which struck me as amusing given the circumstances. I burst into laughter and made my exit, denying any remaining love for her. It wasn't like that at all. It was a delightful fantasy, but entirely implausible. I realized that the entire town would soon learn of Harry's paternity, which could jeopardize my custody of the children in the divorce. Additionally, they would resent being labeled as Marie's illegitimate offspring. I acknowledged that I should have been more subtle in my approach. Taking the initiative, I consulted a divorce attorney and collaborated with them multiple times to draft documents for future use. I then created the exact PowerPoint presentation I had described earlier, but instead of waiting for Marie's dinner event, I presented it to her. One evening, 4 weeks prior to the dinner, after putting the children to bed, I summoned Marie and asked her to review the draft of the PowerPoint I had prepared for her upcoming speech the next month. She snapped, questioning if it could wait because she was exhausted that day. Firmly, I asserted that it couldn't wait, reminding her that I needed to review what changes were necessary so I could make them in time. I mentioned that I did all of this for her in my spare time. I then ushered her into the office and seated her in front of the computer. Instructing her to hit the letter A when she was ready, I told her that the file would start on its own, inwardly smiling. I observed her closely. Initially, everything proceeded smoothly as she rehearsed her remarks on the first few slides of the society's presentation. Then she gasped, her face draining of color as she beheld still images of her and Harry engaged in closeness. Turning to me, mouth agape, she remained silent. I met her gaze impassively. Soon video clips surfaced, featuring conversations about his paternity of her children and her deception of me. As more scenes unfolded, Marie frantically attempted to halt the file, but I thwarted her efforts. Eventually, the screen went dark. This ordeal lasted about 2 minutes. Marie slumped in her chair, head bowed, unable to meet my gaze. After a moment, she finally spoke, lifting her head to look at me. In that instant, she seemed to age 20 years. Bill, Bill, I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I'm truly sorry. Can you ever forgive me? Forgive you? I retorted coldly. For what? Let's see. For having an affair with Harry Dorner, which apparently spanned our entire 6-year marriage. For bearing him 2 children while leading me to believe they were mine. For mocking me and disrespecting me behind my back. For denying me closeness at Harry's behest. Is that what you want forgiveness for? Her sobs intensified. Bill, I don't love him. You're the one I love, the one I've always loved. My anger simmered, restrained. I said nothing, but internally I thought, no, Marie, that's nonsense. You love our lifestyle. You appreciate how I cater to your needs, care for the children, but you don't love me. No woman who loves her husband would behave so deceitfully. I reclined, allowing her tears to flow. I relished her distress, maintaining silence during the 20 minutes it took for her to cry. Eventually, she sniffled several times, wiped her face, and looked at me. What will you do, Bill? Are you going to divorce me? No, Marie, I won't, I lied. I care too much about Katie and Brian, even if they aren't biologically mine. I let the words linger before continuing. But things will change drastically from now on. You can count on that. Let's begin immediately. Call that idiot Harry and tell him to be here in 15 minutes. She stared at me, horror evident on her face. But I can't do that. He's at home with his wife and kids. He won't come. I grinned. Say whatever you must, but get him here. Let him know if he doesn't show up within 15 minutes. His marriage will be over by tomorrow. She hesitated, perhaps unsettled by the coldness in my demeanor. Without uttering another word, she headed to the kitchen and dialed her lover. When Harry arrived, he wore the insincere smile I anticipated. Marie must have briefed him on the situation, for he appeared anxious and apprehensive. Come into the office and take a seat, Harry. And you too, Marie. We have something to discuss, I directed. As we settled, I wasted no time. Okay, Harry, here's the deal. You've been enjoying yourself with Marie for quite some time, making me out to be a fool. That ends now. Everything has changed, and it's time for you to face the consequences. He began to respond, but I silenced him. Sit, watch, and listen. I scrolled through the PowerPoint presentation and relished his horrified reaction to its contents. When the presentation ended, a prolonged, unexpected silence ensued. Strangely, I found myself enjoying it more than they did. Now you'll do exactly as I say without question, or your seemingly blissful marriage to Caroline will abruptly and publicly come to an end. Understand? Don't speak. Just nod, I instructed. He begrudgingly nodded, his expression seething with anger. Good. Listen carefully and keep quiet. I have several documents for you to sign. I'll give them to you one by one. You may want your lawyer to review them, so I'm giving you 48 hours to return them signed. Otherwise, Caroline will be invited to view a brief video clip. The first document acknowledges that you are the biological father of Katie and Brian and commits you to pay child support until they turn 21, along with a lump sum for their college education. The amounts are specified here, $10,000 per child per year, plus $100,000 per child upon their first year of college. The funds will be placed in a trust fund, of which I am the sole trustee, with authority to utilize it for the children's needs, I explained. Harry erupted from his chair in fury. Listen, Bill, this is utterly ridiculous. I have no intention. I forcefully pushed him back into his seat. Shut the hell up, Harry. You're wealthy and we both know it. This isn't your show anymore. It's mine and you have no choice. Now keep quiet until I give you permission to speak, I commanded. Across the room, I noticed Marie looking at me with a horrified expression. This was a side of her devoted husband she had never witnessed before. The second document grants me permission to adopt the children. You and Marie will need to sign it. The third document entails your permanent renouncement of parental rights to Katie and Brian, pledging never to disclose your paternity to anyone. And lastly, a personal admission that you exploited my wife in the workplace, coercing her into an affair, I continued. What? Harry exploded once more. That's a complete fabrication. She wanted it as much as I did. Sit down, Harry, I commanded sternly. Perhaps, but Marie will still file exploitation complaint against you. It's one of my conditions for not divorcing her. Do you understand, Marie? I asked, turning to her. She glanced fearfully between me and Harry, offering no response. Allow me to clarify, I said to both of them. I have no immediate plans to act on these documents. Consider them my insurance, Harry, in case you ever contemplate shirking your financial obligations to our children or suddenly decide to reveal their true parentage to others, I added, handing Marie the prepared exploitation complaint. Sign it, Marie, I instructed firmly. She complied silently, still appearing apprehensive. Now, Harry, we're nearly finished with your part in today's proceedings. I expect these documents back in my possession within 48 hours. You can deliver them here, and should you entertain any misguided thoughts, such as damaging me, rest assured, copies of your incriminating correspondence with Marie are securely stored, ready to surface if necessary," I concluded, gazing at him disdainfully. "Any questions?" Taking Marie's hand, I guided her back to the office and seated her. I had never witnessed her in such a state before. She trembled with horror. "It's all right, Marie. I would never damage you. There's no need to be afraid," I assured her. "God, Bill, what's gotten into you? How could you do this to Harry?" she exclaimed. I regarded her with some surprise. "You truly don't understand, Marie. Don't you realize that what he did to you, to us, is malicious and unjust?" She blushed. "Yes, of course. It's plain." "Well, you're so furious. It's as if you've lost your mind," she continued. I remained silent for a moment, unsure how to respond. "Marie, I've assured you I won't divorce you. However, our marriage will undoubtedly change drastically. Do you comprehend?" I queried. "Yes, Bill. I'll do whatever it takes to make amends. But what have I done to you?" she pleaded. "All right," I acquiesced. "Let's establish a couple of conditions. Within 2 weeks, you'll secure a new job. I won't permit you to continue seeing Harry daily at work. It should be evident, but you are to have no further personal interaction with Harry. No touching, kissing, lovemaking, phone calls, emails, nothing," I outlined. "Furthermore, if our marriage endures, it will be on a wholly different foundation. I refuse to tolerate your bad temper, coldness, and indifference. I expect you to be a cheerful, kind, and affectionate wife each day. Through your actions, demonstrate your love and appreciation for marrying me, forsaking the wild, uninhibited desirability you shared exclusively with Harry. I anticipate seeing you in the seductive lingerie you've kept hidden in your drawer. I expect you to be eager and willing when it comes to closeness. If you truly love me, Marie, you have a lot of lost time to compensate for," I asserted. She crossed the room and knelt before me, embracing my legs tightly. "I love you, Bill, more than words can express, and I'll prove it to you," she declared tearfully. I observed her pale, tear-streaked face and fearful eyes. Somewhere within me lingered traces of the love and devotion I once felt for this woman with whom I shared so much. However, they were overshadowed, rendered insignificant by my resentment towards her selfishness and hypocrisy. "She deserves whatever consequences come her way," I thought. Softening my tone, I said, "Listen, Marie, in 4 weeks, your significant social dinner will occur. Let's utilize this time to start anew, to potentially improve our marriage. If all goes well, the dinner will be an opportunity to celebrate the success of our renewed efforts. Agreed?" She nodded, tightening her embrace. "Yes, Bill. Thank you for giving me a chance. I'll be whatever you want me to be." Drawing her closer, she showered me with kisses, promising to make amends. "Give me 10 minutes to freshen up, and then I'll begin making things right," she pledged, rising with a smile. As she exited the room, I reclined in my chair, amused by Marie's efforts to please me. The next 4 weeks promised to be quite amusing. I was somewhat surprised she failed to notice what I refrained from doing. I refrained from discussing the affair's details or its origins. The entire evening must have been a profound shock for her, leaving no time for reflection. But truthfully, I didn't inquire because I simply didn't care. My relationship with Marie had concluded, though she remained unaware. Upon entering the bedroom a few minutes later, I found the bed neatly made, the lights dimmed, and Marie reclining on her side in a revealing red nightgown after attending to her grooming routine. She looked stunning, as beautiful as ever, yet noticeably nervous. I noticed a bottle of lubricant on the nightstand. In a seductive yet trembling voice, she asked where I was and beckoned me to come to her, extending her arms. I quickly disrobed and embraced her. Our kisses ignited passion. Her body exuded warmth, and she wriggled with anticipation. Whether playful or not, I relished the moment, setting aside my rage and disgust toward Marie to indulge in pleasure with her. Her allure and impatience were exhilarating, particularly after years of indifference. Surrendering to her lead, I lay back as she took charge. Afterward, she extinguished the light and nestled beside me under the blanket. She gently kissed my neck and bid me good night. As I drifted into contented sleep, I anticipated receiving similar attention over the next 4 weeks. I thoroughly enjoyed the subsequent weeks as Marie devoted herself to rebuilding our marriage. The next morning, She woke me with a cheerful smile and a loving kiss, offering pleasure before breakfast. I watched as she went beyond her usual routine to prepare the children for their day. That evening, she prepared an unusual meal from a cookbook, though the kids preferred their usual fare. Marie ensured they bathed and went to bed on time so we could enjoy our evening together. Our nightly closeness was a pleasant change from before. Marie wore another nightgown, and we indulged in leisurely lovemaking. Her enthusiasm, affection, and energy remained consistent. Despite my hidden feelings, I couldn't ignore the semblance of happiness we exuded daily. Marie's loving attention persisted, both in the mornings and behind closed doors. My life seemed like a happy fantasy, albeit with a lack of trust in my wife and simmering rage beneath my facade of contentment. Harry's signed papers arrived promptly, and I quickly obtained Marie's consent for adoption, finalizing the process through a private hearing arranged by my lawyer within 10 days. Then my attorney handled the divorce proceedings. One morning at work, I had a surprise visit from Denise Reynolds, a colleague I collaborate with occasionally. At 28, she was 5 years my junior, and truly stunning. While I knew she was divorced, and her occasional flirty remarks didn't go unnoticed, I never considered her beyond being one of the women I fantasized about. In your dreams, I anticipated Denise's visit to be work-related, but it turned out otherwise. "Bill," she said, "what's different about you lately? You seem, I don't know, younger or fitter or something." "Thanks for the compliment, Denise," I replied with a smile. Then, thinking, why not? I blurted out, "Actually something entirely different, but not suitable for discussion here. Maybe we can grab lunch together today." "Sounds good," she agreed. We headed to the salad bar, then took our lunches to a park table and enjoyed the sunshine. "The change you noticed in me is probably due to my failing marriage," I explained. She looked puzzled. "And that makes you look better? Please explain." I gave her a condensed version of the story. "A couple of weeks ago, I discovered my wife was having an affair with a coworker. It's been going on for a while. I confronted him to leave her alone, and since then, she's been bending over backwards to make it up to me. Here's a secret, Denise. Marie thinks she can win me back, but I've already decided I'll be leaving her in a few weeks. I can't stay with someone who betrayed me. In the meantime, she's treating me like a king, both in and out of the bedroom. That's the change you noticed today," I concluded, and she appraised me with a look. "I'm impressed you're handling it so well," she said. "When I found out my ex was cheating, I nearly fell apart. It took me months to get back on track." "I'm sorry," I offered. "I didn't know you went through that. But I've taken control of my situation now. It'll unfold the way I want, not someone else's way. That's making me feel a lot better." Taking another chance, I added, "One nice thing about my situation is that even though I'm not officially single yet, I know I will be soon. So, I don't have to hold back from expressing my admiration for the lovely lady sitting with me in the park today," I said, smiling at her. She blushed slightly, glanced away, then back at me. "Geez, Bill, you've put me in an awkward spot. I didn't think it was so straightforward," she said. "Sorry, Denise, but you're so beautiful and fun. I've been attracted to you since we met. It's just that until now, it was off limits to talk about it. Any chance you'll join me for dinner on Saturday? I know a charming Italian place with a river view." She looked at me seriously. "Bill, I like you too, and it's always been easy with you. Can I trust you? Is your marriage truly over? Or is this just some ploy to get into my pants? Excuse my skepticism, but I've seen this scenario before. Denise, I've always been honest with you, and as you know, I've never pushed you before. I'm ending things with Marie in about 2 weeks and filing for divorce the same day. There's no going back. But I understand if you want to distance yourself. I'll just be a little disappointed." She smiled. "No, Bill. Now that you've made the offer, I'm ready to accept it before you change your mind." She gazed at me intently, and after a moment's hesitation, I leaned in, and we shared a light, tender kiss. It wasn't fiery or passionate, but it felt like a beautiful promise. As we parted, I couldn't help but smile, feeling like a joyful child. When I informed my wife about my Saturday night date, it brought out a cruel side in me. I bluntly stated that I would be going out with another woman and expected her to stay home with the kids. Marie was taken aback and on the verge of tears. "Bill," she protested, "but I've been trying so hard. Please think of something to salvage our marriage. How can you see someone else?" "It's quite simple, Marie. Not only did you see someone else, but you also engaged in a 6-year-long affair behind my back. While you've been making an effort lately, and I'm feeling better, it doesn't mean you automatically deserve my unwavering devotion. It's clear that I'll need to seek enjoyment elsewhere for quite some time before we're on equal footing." Her tears began to flow. "Will you sleep with her?" "No, but I could. And that's what you need to comprehend. If it hurts you to think about, well, that's a taste of how you made me feel." With that, I exited the room, ending the conversation. My initial outings with Denise were delightful, yet cautious. We proceeded slowly. Perhaps both of us sensed there was more than just physical attraction between us. We conversed, laughed, commiserated about colleagues, exchanged childhood stories, and simply got to know each other. It felt effortless and natural, at times reminiscent of my early days with Marie. The thought saddened me, but I pushed it aside. Following our third dinner, as I opened Denise's car door outside her apartment, she softly asked if I would like to come in. We both understood the implication, and I felt an instant surge of desire. Once inside, she melted into my embrace, and we kissed and embraced like infatuated teenagers. Pulling back slightly, she confessed to me that she really wanted this, but was quite nervous because it had been a while. She asked me to be gentle and patient. I assured her with a smile, lifting her gently, and asked her which way to her bedroom. Later, I reflected that lovemaking with Denise was incredible but noticeably different from recent encounters with Marie. She started out a bit timid, allowing me to explore and caress her body. Yet, she was so stunning that every moment with her was pure pleasure. Our first carnal encounter was tender, affectionate, and far more loving than the passionate encounters I'd had with Marie. It felt like two people caring for each other, bringing each other happiness. Afterward, Denise kissed me repeatedly and asked if I could stay the night. I gladly agreed, and we fell asleep in each other's arms. The following morning, she seemed a bit bashful again, and while we didn't make love, we bid farewell with genuine tenderness, sharing several tender kisses. With just a few days remaining until my planned wedding night with Marie, I kept my intentions hidden from Denise, but mentioned that my divorce would soon be finalized. When I returned home around 9:30 on Saturday morning, I found Marie quietly weeping at the kitchen table, clearly aware of how I'd spent the previous night. Feigning sympathy more than I genuinely felt, I embraced her tenderly. "I'm sorry, Marie. I understand how you must feel," I murmured. "Oh, Bill, this is just awful. The mere thought of you with another woman tears me apart. I've been so selfish all these years. How could I have been so oblivious to your feelings?" Looking at me with gratitude, she whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for giving me another chance." Marie's significant night, much like mine, was rapidly approaching. To some extent, I almost lamented it. The past 4 weeks with Marie, marked by very satisfying closeness, were enjoyable, and I'll miss them. However, nothing she did even began to diminish my resentment and anger. Her utter betrayal far surpassed any attempts at reconciliation. When I examined my heart, there was only a tiny bit of love for her and a minuscule drop of sympathy for what awaited her. While collaborating on a PowerPoint presentation for her speech, I clandestinely prepared my own rendition, not precisely identical to hers, as I needed to conceal Harry's identity as the children's father. Nonetheless, the general approach mirrored hers, a sequence of photos followed by captivating videos. I rigged the laptop so that Marie's presentation would play whenever she used it. However, by inputting a specific key combination, including a passphrase, I could lock her presentation and substitute it with my unique file. In the days leading up to the event and on the evening itself, Marie anxiously asked if I had deleted the dreadful file she encountered 4 weeks ago. Each time, with a loving smile, I reassured her it was gone and demonstrated that her presentation was intact on the laptop. The last few days at home were particularly sweet. Marie began to feel more assured that she was winning me over again, and her affectionate gestures seemed less desperate, yet more serene. The pain she endured when I spent the entire night with Denise only elevated her further in our bed. Knowing that this charade was about to end, I savored every moment. When the big night arrived, we were there early, with me donning a rented tuxedo, and Marie looking glamorous in a black evening dress with spaghetti straps that accentuated her neck and shoulders. We ran her PowerPoint presentation twice to ensure everything was in order. As she leaned over to place her purse under the podium, I swiftly input the key combination, signaling that everything was set, and everything unfolded exactly as I anticipated. We enjoyed a pleasant dinner, engaging in friendly chatter with our companions at the table. Then, Marie was warmly introduced by the outgoing president, and she nervously approached the podium amid applause. According to my watch, her joy and anticipation lasted precisely 54 seconds. That's how long it took for the still photos of her infidelity to appear on the screen. Marie didn't freeze or spill her water, but she turned to me with horror and disbelief before futilely attempting to halt the presentation. Naturally, she failed. As the video clips played and the audience reacted with a mix of indignation and laughter, she stood there, flushed and defeated, making no attempt to respond to the vulgar remarks directed at her. Moments later, we were alone. I sat quietly, observing her from across the table. Finally, she uttered the question straight from my fantasy. "Bill, how could you do this to me? I thought you loved me." "Yes, Marie," I replied. "In these past few weeks, I loved you just as much as you loved me 6 years ago." Approaching the podium, I placed several folded papers in her hand. "I'm filing for divorce. Consider yourself served. If you remain in town, we'll have joint custody of Katie and Brian. Otherwise, I'll fight for full custody, and you know I'll win." Almost at the door, I heard her scream in anguish and fury. "But you promised you wouldn't divorce me. You said we could work things out." Turning back to face her, I responded, "Yes, Marie. So I suppose after all these years of your deceit, I lied to myself."
Growing up, I was surrounded by the whispers of betrayal and heartbreak. My father's indiscretions weren't just family secrets. They were open wounds in our household. His frequent absences, unexplained late nights, and the smell of cheap perfume on his shirts were a stark contrast to my mother's unwavering devotion. I often wondered why she stayed, why she endured the humiliation. As a child, I believed in the sanctity of love, thinking it was something magical that could weather any storm. But the cracks in their marriage taught me otherwise. They revealed a harsh reality where trust was fragile and love could be weaponized. I promised myself my life would be different. When I met Jody in high school, I saw in her what I hoped for: kindness, loyalty, and a sense of shared purpose. We built our relationship on what I thought was a foundation of mutual respect and transparency. From the day we exchanged vows, I envisioned a future free of the chaos and pain I grew up with. I was determined to provide her with the stability my parents never had. Yet, even the strongest foundation can be undermined, and as I would soon learn, illusions of security are no match for the unpredictable storms of life. The night my wife, Jody, decided to spend it in the company of another man wasn't just another evening. It marked the end of an era in my life. She assumed I would take it in stride, that her pursuit of a fleeting thrill wouldn't matter to me. Perhaps she was correct about her excitement, but she miscalculated how deeply it would cut. What she saw as a harmless adventure, I saw as a betrayal that unraveled the very fabric of our marriage. I was at my desk, sipping coffee, thinking about the morning with Jody. We met in high school and mostly dated each other, though we briefly dated other people during disagreements, always coming back to one another. We gave each other our pureness before prom and married 9 months after graduation. As far as I knew, I was her only partner. My phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, so I hesitated. I hate scam calls, especially the ones from the IRS. But this time it was Jody's office number. "Hi, honey," I answered. A man's voice responded, sharp and formal. "This isn't your wife, Mr. Taylor." I blinked, confused. "That's me, John Richard Taylor III, but I go by Trey." The man introduced himself. "I'm Michael Hamilton, a colleague of Jody's. I need you to meet me this afternoon." His tone didn't explain much beyond that. I felt a sudden rush of concern. "Is she okay?" "She was fine when I last saw her," Michael replied. "But I have some information about her that I think you should know. Can you meet me at noon?" He wouldn't explain over the phone. I agreed reluctantly, still unsure if this was some kind of joke. At noon, I met Michael outside Spike's restaurant. He suggested we walk to avoid being overheard, so we headed toward Central Park. Your wife has been spending a lot of time with a man named Stan Morrison at work, he started. They go to lunch together every day, and today they were openly discussing their plans for tomorrow night. Dinner at the Hilton, followed by dancing, and then spending the night together. My stomach sank. Are you telling me they're sleeping together? Yes, Michael confirmed. He's already made reservations, and your wife is out shopping for clothes for the date. I felt numb. How do they think this will work? She thinks you love her enough to let her experience another man, he said. She believes it won't affect your marriage. I stopped walking, trying to process everything. Why are you telling me this? Michael's expression hardened. I was married for 9 years. My wife had an affair and the legal system screwed me over. Now, I'm trying to help someone avoid my situation. We talked for a while longer before he left. I was left thinking about my marriage and what the future held. If Michael was telling the truth, my marriage was over. It scared me how easily I could consider that possibility based on a brief conversation with a stranger. I thought back to my childhood and the pain my mother endured with my father. He was a heavy drinker and womanizer, having multiple affairs and openly mocking her. When I asked why she put up with it, she simply said, I love him. One day, when I was about 11, my dad took me to his girlfriend's house. I ended up walking home after getting bored of petting her dog. When I told my mom where I had been, she didn't confront him, but 2 days later he spanked me with a belt for breaking a plate. Looking back, I realized it was because I had snitched on him. After seeing how my mother suffered, I couldn't imagine condoning Jody having an affair. Even thinking about it made me sick. Call me whatever you want, but I wasn't going to live through what my mother did. Eventually she left my father, and life got better for both of us. She remarried and is happy now. Jody and I live in a house owned by my mother and stepfather, so I was stuck wondering, confront her or ignore it? Wait and see? As a salesman, I knew I had to be proactive, not wait for things to come to me. But in this case, if Michael was right, I didn't know Jody at all. She knew how I felt about infidelity, so I decided to take action. But how do you act when you don't even know if the situation is real? I planned out every possible scenario. I imagined the worst-case outcome and asked myself what I could live with. If I couldn't accept the worst, I would have to make another choice. I made up my mind. First, I found a private investigator. After a quick meeting and spending a lot of money, we had a plan in place. Now I had to figure out how to act when I got home. When I arrived, Jody was there. She kissed and hugged me like she always did, and I had to decide how to respond. I could act normal, which would allow her plans to proceed, or I could drop a hint about what I'd learned. But if I did that, she might just deny everything and wait for things to blow over. I wasn't going to live with that doubt. On the other hand, if I acted suspicious, she might abandon her plan. I decided to act normal. We had dinner, and I fried the pork chops like usual. Acting normal was harder than I expected, but either she was a great actress or, as Michael said, she was so confident that she didn't even try to hide anything. Around 11 p.m., I went upstairs to get ready for bed. Jody was already asleep. I showered, then lay awake, unable to sleep. At 6 a.m., she got up, dressed, and went downstairs. A few minutes later, I did the same, only to find she was already gone. We rarely left the house without kissing each other goodbye, but today was different. It was Friday, usually a good day for RV sales, but I decided to take the day off. I called my boss, then contacted the dealership's attorney to ask for a divorce lawyer recommendation. He referred me to his wife, but warned me she didn't take cases from husbands who cheated. After he called her, I met with the lawyer. I explained my conversation with Michael Hamilton. She asked why I'd hired an investigator based on an unverified story from a stranger. I told her about my parents' marriage and my personal stance against infidelity. She suggested I wait and confirm Hamilton's story, adding that if Jody was as confident as he said, then she'd have nothing to lose by having an affair. I told her that I wouldn't tolerate any affair, big or small, and if Jody went through with her plan, I wanted her served by Monday. If Hamilton's lying, I'll have to eat crow, I said, but if he's telling the truth, I'll be ready. She assured me the paperwork would be ready if needed. By 1 p.m., I was back at work trying to sell a van to an elderly couple. At first, I was doubtful about selling a 45-foot motorhome to them, but after spending time with them, I realized they were in great shape and had a lively, loving relationship. I envied their energy and bond, hoping Jody and I could be like them one day. They picked out their van, and we took it for a test drive. Mr. Jacobson drove confidently, and I could barely focus on the sale, enjoying their conversation. It made me think of how I wanted my own marriage to turn out. I decided to give them a tray discount, taking a bit from my commission. They bought the van, smiling as they left. It was time to head home. I checked in with my investigator and was reassured everything was set. At 5:30 p.m., I pulled into the garage. Jody's car was in its spot and the house was quiet, no dinner cooking. I stayed calm, placed the package from the investigator on the mantel, and sat down to wait. At 5:45, Jody came downstairs, looking stunning in the outfit Michael had described. She had her overnight bag in hand. "Wow, you look gorgeous. What's the occasion?" I asked, trying to hide the knot forming in my stomach. "One of the guys at work has been asking me out, and I thought it'd be fun," she replied casually. "What do you mean, go out with him? Like a date?" I pressed, the confusion creeping into my voice. "Yes," she said, not missing a beat. "We thought since you're the only man I've ever been with. I'd like to sleep with someone else. We're going to dinner, then dancing, and spending the night at a hotel." I felt the blood drain from my face. I couldn't believe how calm she was. "You can't be serious. You're really spending the night with another man? I'm not agreeing to that." "And who's this we are talking about?" I demanded, struggling to make sense of it. "It's no big deal," she said dismissively. "Just one night of fun. I'll be back tomorrow, and it'll be like nothing happened. I might even pick up a few tricks you might like." "There's no way I'm letting you go out tonight with someone else," I said firmly, my voice tight with anger. "Don't be ridiculous," she shot back. "I'm serious, Jody. If you go, our marriage is over," I said, each word heavy with finality. Just then, we heard a car honk from outside. "That's him," she said, heading toward the door. I moved quickly, blocking her path. "Please, don't do this," I said, my voice pleading as I reached out. "I have to go," she replied, stepping around me and kissing me on the cheek. "I'll be home by noon tomorrow, and everything will be fine," she said, already heading for the door. "If you leave, you won't have anywhere to come back to," I warned, my heart sinking with the words. "Now you're being really stupid," she said, rolling her eyes. "Enjoy your night thinking about how much fun I'm having. We'll talk tomorrow. Good night." She kissed me and left. I didn't watch her get into the car. I walked over to the fireplace, turned off the recorder, and carried the box of trash bags upstairs. It took me nearly 2 hours to remove every trace of her. I emptied her closet and bathroom vanity, even taking her birth certificate, high school diploma, and social security card from the safe. I set everything by the garage door and gathered up her family photo albums, school awards, and the Remington bronze statue from her grandfather. I cleared out all her magnets from the fridge, stuffed everything in her car, rolled it out of the garage, and parked it on the street, leaving the keys on the driver's seat. I climbed into bed, but sleep wouldn't come. I tossed and turned for hours. Finally, I got up, made coffee, and tried watching a Hogan's Heroes marathon, but it didn't help. For the next 2 days, I couldn't sleep at all. I felt like a zombie. By 11 a.m. on the third day, I'd finished a sale with the Jacobsons, wrapping up all the paperwork. I was home by 11:45, and the locksmith had already delivered a new set of keys. The investigator was there too, handing over the video footage he'd recorded over the past 18 hours. At 12:30, I was sitting in front of the TV, watching the tapes when I heard the doorbell. I opened the door to find Jody standing there. "Hey, my key doesn't work, and why is my car outside?" she asked. I blocked the door. "Your key doesn't work because you don't live here anymore. And your car's outside because I don't want it in my garage." "What are you talking about? This is my house now," she demanded, trying to push past me. I said, "I told you last night. If you got in that man's car, you wouldn't have a place to come back to. All your stuff's in your car." "You can't be serious," she said, clearly shocked. "It was just," she started, but I didn't let her finish. I slammed the door in her face. She pounded on the door, so I opened it again. "If you don't stop banging, I'll call the police and have you arrested," I threatened, though I knew I probably couldn't do that. But I had nothing left to lose. "You can't do that! This is my house!" she yelled. "This house belongs to my mother and stepfather," I replied, "and they've decided you don't live here anymore. Now leave!" She stood there, speechless, and I slammed the door in her face again. I went back to watching the tapes, but the anger inside me kept building. After a while, I glanced out the window and saw Jody sitting in her car. I went to the kitchen for water, but poured myself a gin and tonic instead, my frustration growing. Then the doorbell rang. It wasn't just a ring. It was constant, relentless. I was ready to snap. I imagined tearing into her and feeding the pieces to the dogs. I opened the door, and there stood her sister, Judy, still pressing the doorbell. "Jody's crying at my house. I want to know why," she said. I didn't care. "Screw it," I thought, and slammed the door in her face. But the bell rang again, and this time I yanked the door open and slammed her hand against it, causing her to nearly lose her balance. "Ring that bell one more time, and I'll break your fingers one at a time," I warned. Judy pushed against the door, holding it open. "Talk to me, please." I stood there for a moment before slowly opening the door and letting her in. She looked at me. "I thought you loved Jody. I can't believe you kicked her out over a stupid disagreement." "Stupid disagreement?" I scoffed. "She told me you had a fight over a walk and that you kicked her out." Judy sighed. "Well, that part's true. She wanted to go out and I didn't. But she didn't tell you she wanted to go out with a guy from work, did she?" I shook my head. "Did she tell you they were planning dinner, dancing, and then a hotel room?" I didn't wait for an answer, just played the audio tape I'd made the night before. Judy listened, her face falling. "I had no idea," she said, shaking her head. "Yeah, neither did I replied flatly. "So what are you going to do?" she asked softly. "Divorce her?" she added, almost as an afterthought. "No," I said bitterly. "This marriage is over." Judy nodded, then stood up. I walked her to the door. She hesitated, looking at me, and I opened it, escorting her out. The rest of the evening and all of Sunday, I did nothing but eat grilled cheese sandwiches and drink gin and tonics. Self-pity had taken over. Then there was another knock at the door, Judy again. "You said if I rang the bell one more time, you'd break my fingers, so I knocked," she said. "I've been talking to Jody all day. What you told me is true." I let her in, motioning for her to sit down. "So what's the deal?" "She says nothing happened," I asked. Judy nodded. "She admitted it was a disaster. They went to the hotel, drank too much, passed out. She woke up, realized what she was doing, and insisted he take her home." "Well, that's a story," I muttered, still not buying it. "You believe her, don't you?" Judy asked. "I believe she and this guy spent days, maybe weeks, planning it. They spent time together, talked, grew close. He knows more about my marriage than I do. They planned to cheat, and it doesn't matter if nothing happened. That's a betrayal." Judy was silent. "You don't believe her, do you?" she asked. "No," I replied firmly. "Even if nothing happened, you're not going to forgive her?" she pressed. "Not in this lifetime," I said. We reached the door and she paused. "When this is over, can we still be friends?" I took a deep breath. "Jody and I are getting a divorce. If she fights it, it'll get ugly. By the time it's over, you probably won't want to be friends with me anymore." She smiled faintly. "I see. Well, I think I'll miss you." She placed a hand on my cheek and kissed my other cheek softly, then left, closing the door behind her. Since Saturday, my phone had been off most of the time. Jody tried reaching me repeatedly, but eventually gave up. I managed to speak to her father, who tried to convince me that since nothing physical had happened with Stan, it wasn't a big deal and I should move on. I explained it to him the same way I had to Judy. After the call, he realized divorce was inevitable and sighed before hanging up. On Monday, I called my attorney and told her about the weekend's events. I also instructed her to serve Jody with a summons that day. My attorney assured me it would be done by the end of the day. I spent the rest of the day not remembering much. Around 4 p.m., my phone rang. I saw it was Jody's office number and decided to answer. "Hello?" I said. "Good afternoon, Mr. Taylor. This is Michael Hamilton. I thought you might want to know that there was some excitement here today," he said. "Really?" I asked, curious. "Yes. Your wife was served with a summons, and after reading the papers, she fainted. An ambulance took her to the hospital. When the paramedics left, Stan Morrison picked up the papers, looked them over, and almost fainted too." As serious as the situation was, part of me found it darkly amusing, but I had no sympathy for either of them. "I'll keep you posted on any developments," Michael said. "Please do," I replied before hanging up. A moment later, my phone rang again. It was Judy. "Hello?" I answered. "Jody's in the hospital," she said. "So?" I replied coldly. "I just thought you might want to know." "I didn't ask," I added more sharply than I intended. "Are you really that heartless?" Judy asked. "My coldness comes from your sister," I answered. "I warned you this would go south. This is just round one." The following weeks played out predictably. Jody tried to talk to me countless times, but I ignored her. Her parents urged me to listen, but I refused. My mother spent a lot of time trying to comfort me, but I insisted I was fine, though she didn't believe it. Michael Hamilton called daily, and I enjoyed his calls. He was the only one who knew what was going on with Morrison. Jody came to work but just sat at her desk, only meeting with her lawyer. She and Morrison barely spoke, at least not in front of anyone. Me? I was just stalling. Our lawyers set up a meeting. Jody, her lawyer, my lawyer, and me. It was the first time I'd seen her since I kicked her out. She looked thinner and worn out, and I was surprised to see Judy there. Jody's lawyer asked if everything was okay. "Are you sure you want to be here?" I asked Judy. "I'm here for Jody," she replied. "That's not what I asked," I said, staring at her. "But fine, stay." Jody was already sitting at the table, so we all took our seats. Her lawyer started, "Mrs. Taylor categorically denies the infidelity and asks for the divorce petition to be dismissed so they can work on saving the marriage. She's willing to go to counseling." My lawyer and I exchanged a glance before he spoke. If there was no infidelity, could Mrs. Taylor explain her actions that night? We all looked at Jody. "I'll be happy to," she said calmly. "A gentleman friend picked me up." "Does he have a name?" my lawyer asked. "Of course, but his name isn't important. Nothing bad happened, so no need to involve him." She repeated what Judy had told me. Champagne, dinner, more champagne, getting too drunk to have fun, passing out, and then coming home to be kicked out. "Poor misunderstanding," she sighed. "I made a mistake. I love my husband, and I want him to forgive me." I looked at Judy, who nodded in agreement. My lawyer, who had been quiet until now, asked, "Okay, let's assume everything you said is true, and no sex occurred. Was there any touching? Anything that wouldn't pass the husband test?" "Absolutely not," Jody insisted. Judy nodded. My lawyer glanced at me, and I glanced back. I picked up the remote, pressed play, and a screen dropped down from the ceiling, showing Jody walking to Stan Morrison's car in our driveway. He opened the door for her, and they kissed, long and passionately. Then they got in and drove off. I paused the video. "Lie number 1, I said, looking around the room. Everyone sat up straighter. Jody turned pale, and Judy just stared at her sister. On Thursday, after Michael Hamilton's call, I spoke with my investigator. We planned to videotape Jody's every move on Friday night, starting when Stan Morrison arrived at our house. Thanks to Hamilton, we knew the location of their date and the room number they had booked. My investigator was able to get access to their suite before check-in. "You said there was no inappropriate touching, right?" I asked Jody. "Yes," she replied, though unsure. I pressed play. The video showed Jody and Morrison at the Hilton's restaurant, where his hand was on her rear. "Lie number 2, I said. Jody looked around. Her lawyer was reading the divorce petition, and Judy was inspecting her nails. The video continued. Jody and Morrison ordered champagne, finished it, and rushed to the elevator. I had paid my investigator $1,000 to get into their suite before they checked in. 4 minutes after entering, Jody was already entertaining Morrison. Then, Jody screamed and ran out, followed by Judy. I paused the video. "Seems my client forgot some details," said Jody's lawyer, quickly packing up and leaving with the sisters. Later, I returned to the dealership, and Judy approached my booth. She paused for a moment before asking, "May I sit down?" "Sure," I replied, motioning to the chair across from me. We both sat in silence for a few moments. Finally, Judy broke the quiet. "You knew, didn't you?" "Knew what?" I asked, confused. "When I came to your house that Saturday," she continued, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "You already knew they were sleeping together." I sighed, a weight settling in. "Yes," I admitted. "I watched the video before you arrived." Judy's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't interrupt. I pressed on. "And they weren't just fooling around, Judy. They were doing it. She's my wife, and she let it happen." A long pause followed, then she asked softly, "Why didn't you tell me?" "I thought she'd admit it herself," I said, the words coming out heavy. "I thought she'd agree to a divorce. If she had, I would have spared you and your family the details. I've always liked your parents." The room fell quiet again, the tension thick. My phone rang, breaking the silence. I answered immediately. "This is Michael Hamilton," came the voice on the other end. "Just so you know, your wife called yesterday and quit. She didn't even clear her desk." "Thanks," I said, my voice flat. "Let me know if you hear anything else." I hung up without another word. Judy opened her mouth to speak, but was interrupted by the office loudspeaker. "Trey, you have a call on line 6. I nodded to Judy before stepping away to take the call. It lasted about 15 minutes, during which Judy remained still, her gaze distant. When I returned, she looked at me with a certain finality. "She's gone, Trey." "What do you mean gone?" I asked. "She packed up and left. Probably moved into her own place, Judy said quietly. I don't think so, Judy added. She asked me to tell your parents she was sorry for disappointing them. It wasn't just your parents she disappointed, I replied. Yeah, we know, she said softly. Judy stood up, glanced at me, and walked out. Later that night, I watched the full video again. My lawyer still had the earlier copy, but I had my own. Watching it made me numb. There was no romance, no love. He didn't care about her feelings. The pain and anger swirled in me. Part of me wanted to scream in agony. Another part wanted revenge. My thoughts were a mess. I fell asleep in the chair, my mind swirling with thoughts of the betrayal. Over the following weeks, my lawyer tried to arrange another meeting with Jody and her lawyer, but he couldn't get in touch with her. A month passed, then another. I checked in with Judy and her parents. No one had heard from Jody. I thought about hiring a tracker, but my lawyer advised against it. I canceled the credit cards and took half the money. The records showed she hadn't used any of the remaining funds. If she stays gone long enough, we could file for desertion, but we'll see. Then the phone rang. Trey Taylor, I answered. Good morning, Mr. Taylor. It's Michael Hamilton. Do you remember me? Of course, Michael. How's everything going? I replied, sitting up in the chair. Not bad, he said. I just wanted to update you on my situation. Remember my divorce? Yeah, I said. Your ex was living with her boyfriend. That's right, Michael confirmed. Turns out the guy's a thief. He convinced my ex to steal from her company, and now they're both in jail. I chuckled. Good for them. Are you still at the same place? Michael asked. Yeah, I replied. That's actually why I'm calling, he continued. Since your wife left, things have been quiet. Stan Morrison's been keeping to himself, but lately some of his calls have been interesting. Interesting how? I asked, intrigued. He was talking to your wife today. I frowned. How do you know? I overheard him say, I miss you too, Jody, Michael said. I sat up straighter. Did you hear where she is? I got her phone number after he talked to her, Michael explained. He left his phone on the desk, so I grabbed it and wrote it down. Nice work, Michael, I said, impressed. Thanks, he replied. Keep me posted if you hear anything else. I got the number, passed it to my attorney, and decided to make the call. The phone rang, and someone picked up. Hello? Hi, Judy. It's Trey. What do you need? She asked, her tone flat. Do you or anyone in your family know anyone in Florida? I asked. Why? She responded, cautious. Because I think Jody's there. Why do you care? Judy shot back. I want a divorce, and she needs to sign the papers, I explained. When are you going to ask her? Judy replied, sounding uninterested. I don't need to ask, I said. My lawyer is already handling it, but it would save him some trouble. She lives in Fort Lauderdale, Judy said, almost reluctantly. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Why didn't you say anything before? Over the next few days, Judy gave me Jody's address and confirmed that Jody knew the divorce papers were ready. I gave the address to my attorney, and he immediately sent them. Judy and I planned to have dinner and then watch the video at my house. She made it clear, though, that revenge wasn't on the table, and she wouldn't sleep with her brother-in-law. Thursday morning, Michael Hamilton called again. Hey, Mr. Taylor, just a quick update. Stan Morrison quit his job today. No notice, just packed up and left. He told someone he's moving to Florida. Interesting. Thanks, Michael, I said. By the way, how's everything with you? Michael asked. My wife confessed to the theft and pled guilty, I replied. She'll get a light sentence, but her boyfriend's looking at serious time. I laughed, and we chatted a little longer before I ended the call. I immediately dialed Judy's number. How long have you known Stan Morrison was moving to Florida? I asked when she picked up. There was a long silence on the other end. Judy, how long? I pressed. A few days, she finally answered. How many times have they seen each other since she moved in with him? I continued. 4. She's been here twice, and he's been there twice. 4 times? I couldn't believe it. You knew she was still seeing him, and you were okay with that, after everything? Trey, she's my sister, Judy said quietly. I ended the call. Moments later, Judy called again, but I ignored it. I sat in my cubicle for a while, then walked over to the repair shop to talk to the mechanics. One of them, a friend of mine, was a retired Army vet. He'd lost part of his leg and fingers in Iraq, and he was one of the few who understood what I was going through. We sat outside, and I brought him up to speed. I could make sure they don't make it to Florida, he said. No, I replied. Neither one is worth going to jail over. I just want to be rid of her. I can make that happen too, he offered. I laughed. Nah, living with myself is punishment enough. We talked for a while longer, until I heard over the loudspeaker, "Trey, call line 4. Back at my cubicle, I picked up the phone. "Trey Taylor. Trey, please don't hang up." I hung up, walked over to the receptionist and said, "No more calls today. I'm going home." When I turned onto my street, I saw Judy's car parked in front of my house. I pulled into the driveway, and by the time I reached the garage, she was already at the front door knocking. She remembered my threat about the doorbell, so I entered through the garage and made my way to the kitchen. She kept knocking, so I decided to answer. "You're not welcome here," I said as I opened the door. "Listen," she started. I shut the door in her face, this time without slamming it. I heated up some spaghetti and meatballs, then went to my bedroom where I fell asleep by 10 p.m. The next morning, I was getting ready for work when I saw Judy waiting for me. She probably thought I wouldn't cause a scene at work. She was wrong. As I tried to pass her, she grabbed my arm. "Damn it, Trey, listen." I pulled my arm away. "You don't have anything I want to hear. You let her come back to me while she was sleeping with that fool over and over, and you didn't tell me? All 3 of you can rot in hell." It was a while before I saw Judy again, but she stayed in touch with my mom. By then, the whole dealership knew what was going on, making for a long day. I stuck around the dealership trying to figure out my next move, then headed home. Later, my mom called and invited me over for dinner. I went, and she made Italian food. We ate, but the evening took a turn when she said, "I talked to Judy today." "Mom, if you bring up this family again, I'm leaving," I warned her. "Trey, listen. There's something you don't know," she said, her tone serious. "I know everything I need to know." "Jody cheated and I'm divorcing her," I replied, trying to keep my anger in check. "Good, but what about the baby?" she asked, her voice softer. "What?" I shot up from the table, stunned. "I talked to her. She's pregnant," Mom explained. "You didn't tell me." My voice cracked with disbelief. "She asked us not to," Mom said. "So you listened to her and ignored your own son," I shot back, hurt and frustrated. "We thought you might need more time to forgive her," she said, her voice tinged with guilt. "Forgive her? Have you lost your mind? Do you remember what it was like living with a cheater?" I couldn't hold back the anger anymore. "Honey, things are different now. People are freer to try new things," she said, trying to explain. I stormed out. Was I living in an alternate universe? My mom had been through hell with my dad's cheating, and now she was telling me cheating was okay for my wife. I loved her, but her naivety was astounding. It was like she'd buy an encyclopedia from a traveling salesman in the age of smartphones. I drove past my house and ended up at a car dealership. I had my keys with me, so I went inside, found the employee lounge, and laid down on the couch. I tossed and turned until nearly 5 a.m. before falling asleep. I woke up at 10:30, and my boss found me and put up a sign asking people not to disturb me. When I finally got moving, one of the salesmen told me that the boss wanted to see me. I wasn't feeling great, my back ached from the couch, and I desperately needed a shower, but I made my way to his office. "Trey," he said, looking up from his desk, "you need some time off, and I can make that happen. You remember the Jacobsons? The couple you sold the blue Prevost to?" "Yes," I replied. "Well, last week, Mr. Jacobson had a heart attack in Vancouver. He's okay now, but they need someone to bring the carriage home, and they've asked for you." "Sounds perfect," I said. "When can I leave?" "Tomorrow," he answered. "Janie will book your flight. Use the company credit card for expenses." "Great. I'll get packed," I said, feeling relieved. "How long should I take?" "Take 4 days for the trip back," he instructed. "But take 10. The Jacobsons aren't in a rush, and we don't need you back too soon. Hand over your deals to Ben, and he'll handle them." When I got to Vancouver, I went straight to the hospital. Mr. Jacobson had a lot of tubes and machines hooked up, and Mrs. Jacobson was fussing over him, trying to make him comfortable while he grumbled. It was clear they just wanted to be near each other, and it made me smile. "Mrs. Jacobson, it's good to see you," I said. "Hi, Trey. How was the flight?" "I picked up Mr. Jacobson," I said. "Now be quiet, Robert." "You heard what the doctor said," Mrs. Jacobson teased. "I can tell him to be quiet now, and he can't argue. Doctor's orders." She winked at me. We sat, talking while Robert drifted in and out of sleep. Every time we thought he was out, a nurse would come in to check his vitals or adjust his meds. Mrs. Jacobson told me the motorhome was parked nearby and that their grandchildren had been with them. Her grandson had flown home, but their granddaughter was packing to return with me once Robert was discharged. Just as we finished talking, the granddaughter walked in, carrying 2 suitcases for her grandparents. She was about my age, attractive, and clearly uninterested in me. After a brief exchange with her grandmother, Mrs. Jacobson turned to me. "Darla has been driving our car for the last week. She'll take you to the bus to get it ready," she said, but Darla didn't seem thrilled. "Darla, stop it. You'll be fine," Mrs. Jacobson added. "She doesn't want to go back with you, Trey. She thinks she should stay with us. By the way," Mrs. Jacobson continued, "your boss said you might need a few extra days and suggested traveling through Yellowstone. We promised Darla we'd do that on the way home." "I'll see what I can do," I replied. As we were leaving, she handed me a letter authorizing me to take the bus across the border and kissed me on the cheek. "Thanks for helping. Be careful." Darla and I drove to the RV park. She kept quiet, grunting and ignoring me. I tried to make conversation, but she wasn't having it. When we reached the bus, she went inside, taking the car keys with her. I asked her for the keys, but she tossed them at me, and I barely dodged them. "What's your problem?" I muttered as I picked them up. Fed up, I hooked the car up to the bus. After a short break, I considered grabbing a cold beer, so I went inside to see if the Jacobsons had any. "No beer?" I asked. "I'm not your maid," I shot back when Darla closed the fridge and stormed off. That was it. I was done with all the women in my life, Jody, Judy, my mom, and now Darla. Mrs. Jacobson was the only one still remotely civil, but even that was wearing thin. I disconnected the power and water, got in the driver's seat, and started the engine. By 8 p.m., I'd crossed into the U.S. and cleared customs. Darla had to step outside for the border check before returning to the bedroom. I was ready to get this trip over with. By 7 a.m. the next day, we were in Burley, Idaho. I'd stopped a few times overnight for coffee and sandwiches, but I was tired and irritable. Darla sat in silence next to me for a while before finally speaking. "I'm hungry. Is there anything to eat?" I snapped, remembering how she'd treated me the night before. "I'm not your damn maid," I said, pressing the gas pedal harder. She glared at me and stormed off to the bedroom. By 9 a.m., I needed to stop at a rest area. When I came back from the bathroom, she was getting off the bus. "If you get off, you can't get back on," I said, starting the engine. By noon, I was sore from driving, so I pulled into a parking lot between two trucks and collapsed on the couch. I passed out almost instantly. I woke up to the hum of the Cummins diesel engine and realized we were moving. Checking the time, I saw I'd been asleep for 5 hours. Darla was at the wheel, driving fast. After watching her for a bit, I figured she knew what she was doing. Her grandfather had obviously taught her well. I made some coffee and sat in the passenger seat. We drove in silence for 2 hours, but I started to get worried about the fuel. We'd been driving for about 25 hours, averaging 60 miles per hour, and had covered around 1,500 miles. At 8 mpg, we were almost out of fuel. "Hey, we should stop for gas," I said, but she didn't respond. I tried again. "We need fuel." Still nothing. Finally, she snapped, "I took care of it while you were snoring." Surprised, I went back to the couch and fell asleep again. I never saw her eat, drink, or use the bathroom during the trip, but she managed everything while I slept. After another 3 hours, we stopped at a truck stop in Dumas, Texas. It was past 10 p.m. I made sandwiches, grabbed coffee, and took the wheel, heading for Houston. I drove through the night, only stopping once for a bathroom break and some snacks. By 8 a.m., I pulled into the dealership in Houston. I needed a break, so I went downstairs to the restroom. It had been less than 40 hours since we'd gone through customs, but it felt like days. As I came out of the restroom, I saw the Jacobsons' car pulling out. The window was down, and I got an unsavory gesture from Darla. I returned it, then made myself coffee in the break room before crashing on the couch. I didn't stir until 3 p.m. When I woke up, I found a note from my boss saying he wanted to see me. I headed to his office and knocked. "You're monopolizing the break room," he said, half joking. "I got a call from Mrs. Jacobson. She wanted to know how you survived driving with her granddaughter." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. Apparently, Darla was a pain the entire trip. The Jacobsons didn't want her with them, and the grandson left because he couldn't handle her anymore. "Mrs. Jacobson was impressed you didn't strangle her," I smirked. "I wanted to, believe me." He laughed. "Anyway, they're glad you made it back safely. Mr. Jacobson will be discharged soon, and they want us to service the bus. They're even talking about buying it." "That's great," I said. "I thought they might sell it." He shook his head. "Not a chance. Now go home and get some rest. The break room needs a break from you." After just 3 days, it felt like I'd been gone longer. I showered, shaved, and slept for almost 30 hours. When I finally checked my phone, I realized I hadn't even thought about it. I dug through my clothes from the trip, looking for it, but my phone wasn't there. I called my boss. "Hey, can you check the break room and the coach for my phone? I think I left it somewhere." He called back a few minutes later, confirming no luck. Damn, I muttered to myself. How many customer calls did I miss? I went to the dealership and caught up with a few client messages by noon. I was heading back to my cubicle after grabbing coffee when I saw Darla walk into the break room. I quickly ducked into the staff area and waited. After about 10 minutes, the loudspeaker called my name. I took my time sipping my coffee before heading to my boss's office. He greeted me and mentioned Darla Jacobson was there to return my cell phone, which I'd left in her grandparents' car. As he was talking, his phone rang, and he stepped away to take the call. I nodded at Darla and followed her into the showroom. She held out my phone, but I kept my distance, not reaching for it right away. After a few steps, she placed it on a nearby table. "Am I really that bad?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. She left without saying another word. Back at my desk, I was processing everything when a loud crash from outside caught my attention. I saw a wreck involving 2 cars, and when I got to the scene, it was Darla. She'd been injured, but wasn't in immediate danger. As medics worked on her, she looked up and smiled. "You always catch me at my best," she said before passing out. The EMTs took her to the hospital. I called the Jacobsons to update them, assuring them Darla was okay. Then I heard Mr. Jacobson's cold response. "A broken arm. Too bad it wasn't her neck." After that, Mrs. Jacobson asked me to call Darla's parents, which I did. Later, I noticed 54 messages on my phone, mostly from my mother, Judy, clients, and one from Michael Hamilton. I set up appointments with the clients and ignored the rest. I left work at 5 p.m., heading home, but detouring to the hospital. At the information desk, I found Darla's room, where her parents were already visiting. Her mom introduced me to Ralph and Joanna Jacobson. They were friendly, but Darla's dad joked about how she'd talked non-stop about our trip. "Darla won't stop talking about it," her mom said. "I bet," I thought, recalling how unbearable she could be. After a brief conversation, I said my goodbyes, but Darla's dad stopped me to thank me for calling them. I nodded and left, feeling out of place. Back home, I debated calling my mother, but decided against it. That decision lasted for weeks, during which both my mother and Judy tried calling, but I ignored them. Even my stepfather reached out, and while I spoke with him, I cut the conversation short when he tried to pass the phone to my mother. I received the divorce papers from my attorney, sent to the address Judy had given me. Her signature was bold and written in red marker, and there was no mention of her pregnancy. If it was real, in 2 months, I'd be free. I was starting to think about staying single, which also made me think about my current celibacy. Damn it. I hadn't been with anyone in so long that I barely sat down before heading to the bathroom to shower and get ready for dinner. Just as I finished getting dressed, the phone rang. "Hello?" I answered. "Hi, Trey. It's Dottie Jacobson," came the voice on the other end. "Hi, Mrs. Jacobson. How's Robert doing?" I asked. "Call me Dottie," she replied warmly. "He's doing great. He's even planning our next trip to Colorado. I'm a little nervous about how he'll handle the mountains, though." "Don't worry, Dottie. His trainer will make sure he's safe. As long as he doesn't try to speed, he'll be fine." "That's what he says. He's been reading all about mountain driving." I chuckled. "Well, I might need some Valium before we go." She laughed, and I could hear the warmth in her voice. I liked Robert and Dottie. They were a good couple. "Anyway," she continued, "we're having a barbecue this Friday at 6 o'clock to celebrate Robert's recovery. Bring your wife. We'd love to meet her." I froze for a moment, realizing I'd never mentioned my personal life to them. Darla probably hadn't either. They didn't know I was almost divorced. "Thanks, Dottie," I said, regaining my composure. "I'd love to come." And with that, I ended the call. It was a great week at work. I sold 3 vans, one of which had been a high-end bus owned by a country star. My commission was excellent. I arrived at the Jacobson estate on Friday at 6 p.m. The house was impressive, and the garage housed their boat, which I'd driven over from Vancouver. A valet parked my car, which felt strange, but I went with it. Inside, there were about 50 guests. Dottie greeted me with a hug and asked where my wife was. "I'm in the process of getting a divorce," I told her. She pulled me back and said, "Your wife is an idiot." Then she put her arm around me, leading me to the crowd. When she mentioned introducing me to some nice young ladies, I knew I didn't belong. I decided to stay only briefly. While finishing my brisket and beer, I spotted Darla running away from a guy. I didn't expect her to be here, but I should have. She grabbed my hand before I could slip away. "Come on, Trey," she said, pulling me into the house and toward the library. Yes, the library. Once inside, she looked at me, clearly upset. "This guy's an a-hole. I have a behavior problem and need help." I started to walk out. "Where are you going?" she called after me. "I'm leaving," I replied, heading toward the door. "Before you kick me out?" she asked, almost pleading. "Because I agree with him," I said, turning back slightly. "He shouldn't have said that in front of everyone. Someone had to say it." "Damn it, Trey, you're supposed to be on my side," she shot back, frustration in her voice. "Why? The only nice thing you ever said to me was while you were lying in the street, bleeding," I retorted, my words sharp. She slumped onto a chair, and I stood still, not looking at her. "How's the arm?" I asked, trying to break the tension. "It itches like hell," she muttered. "I have to use this thing to scratch." She pulled out a tool from her cast that looked like a back scratcher. "I've got to go," I said, heading for the door. "Trey?" she called after me. "Yeah?" I turned back slightly. "If I promise to behave, will you have dinner with me?" she asked softly. I paused before replying. "Darla, I'm going through a divorce. I don't need the extra stress, and I'm likely to do something that'll make things worse. So no, dinner's not a good idea." Saturday morning, I packed up and left. My mom showed up at my door later that day, and I let her in. "I've been thinking it over, and I agree with you," she said. "There are things we can compromise on, but faithfulness in marriage isn't one of them. You reminded me of the pain with your father, and no one should go through that. I'm sorry for pushing you to get back with Judy. I was selfish, only thinking about the baby and the idea of being a grandmother. Please forgive me." I forgave her, and we hugged. We chatted for another hour before she left. Monday mid-morning, my phone rang. "Trey Taylor," I answered. "Good morning, Trey. It's Michael Hamilton. I have news." "What's the news?" I asked. "Stan Morrison called to ask for his job back, and they said no," Michael replied. I laughed. "Just thought you might want to know." "Thanks, Michael," I said, hanging up. Now I was on a first-name basis with him. Around noon, the Jacobsons' carriage pulled into the yard. I was with customers, so I couldn't greet them right away. 30 minutes later, after walking my clients to their car, I made my way to the bus. Darla opened the door. "Hi, come on in," she said. I stepped inside and turned left, avoiding the driver's seat. Once seated, I noticed the smell of lasagna from the kitchen. Darla handed me a glass of wine. "Clink," she said, holding up her glass. We both took a sip. It was a great Chianti. I thought I'd offer lunch instead of dinner. Also, I figured it'd be better to talk privately instead of embarrassing or pissing you off in public, she said. I asked my grandparents if I could use the bus, and when I explained why, they agreed. They just made me promise not to drive off if I got mad. "You said when, not if," she said with a smile. "He knows you well." I expected an argument, but Darla stayed calm, took another sip of wine, and turned to fill her glass. "I hope you're hungry. I made lasagna this morning. It's really good, if I do say so myself," she said, moving around the kitchen despite her cast. The doorbell rang. "Bring it in, please," she called. I went to open the door, and my boss stood there. I waved it off awkwardly. "It's okay," I said, closing the door and returning to my seat. Darla seemed at ease. She moved naturally around the small kitchen, clearly comfortable. I smiled, but I knew one of us would probably do something to annoy the other eventually. She asked me to sit at the dining table, and I did. The bus was tight on space, but the living area expanded with sliding drawers. We ate, chatted, and finished a bottle of Chianti. Neither of us had gotten on each other's nerves yet. After a couple of hours, I decided to head back to work. "Thanks, Darla. It was a nice surprise, and the food was great." "My pleasure," she said, walking me to the door. As I stepped down, she leaned in and kissed me gently. We both paused, shocked. "Is dinner still off the table?" she asked, a mischievous twinkle in her eyes. "How about tonight? Let's say 7 o'clock. She gave me her address, and I started to leave, but we kissed again. It took me another 10 minutes to finally leave. I stepped off the bus and saw 6 faces, including my boss, watching me through the exhibit hall window. As soon as they realized I saw them, they scattered, except for my boss, who opened the door for me. "Well, I'm off to get ready for my date tonight," I said, laughing. 10 minutes later, Darla drove the bus out of the parking lot. As we headed to her house, my phone rang. "Trey Taylor." "So you managed not to eliminate each other, huh?" Dottie's voice came through. "Hey, Dottie, I think Robert's listening." "We want to hear your side," Robert said. I'm a gentleman. I don't kiss and tell, I laughed. Horse crap, Robert interrupted. Watch your language, Robert, Dottie scolded. Trey, she continued. When Darla asked to borrow the coach, she was nervous, but finally confessed it was to make you lasagna. I had no idea she could cook. She blushed when she said it. She made you lasagna? I asked. Yep, she just knows, Darla had replied, blushing. Trey, Dottie said. She's tough on the outside, but she's a good girl at heart. She's been hurt a lot and uses that attitude as armor. Just don't hurt her, okay? Understood, I said, though I thought Robert was overreacting. I'm just saying, treat her right, Robert warned. Don't worry, I replied. Before I could hang up, my phone rang again. Trey, it's Judy, came the voice on the other end. The anger hit me instantly, but I forced myself to stay calm. What's up, Judy? I just wanted you to know, she began, her voice tight. Jody kicked Stan out, but he came back today and battered her up. She's in the hospital, Trey. Her nose is broken. She's in ICU and Stan's in jail. My heart sank. What about the baby? I asked, barely able to keep my voice steady. She lied about it, Judy replied, her tone flat. It's gone, and honestly, I'm done with her, Trey. She's still my wife until the divorce is final, I said. She stopped being your wife the day she signed those papers, Judy retorted. Goodbye. When we reached Darla's gated community, the guard acted surprised when I told him I was visiting her. He laughed as he called her to check, then wished me luck as he opened the gate. At dinner, I learned Darla liked steak and potatoes, medium rare ribeye with blue cheese and baked potatoes. I was impressed by how she handled cutting the steak with her arm in a cast. She ate half, then switched to her drink, and the waiter offered to pack the leftovers. I joked, I didn't know you had doggy bags here. The waiter grinned. First time for everything. As we left, the same guard was at the gate, but this time his expression was less amused. I glanced at Darla and joked, I don't have many dates, and he's not used to me coming home in the same car I left in. Usually I take a cab. When we got to her house, she invited me inside. What would you like to drink? She asked. A gin and tonic, I replied. We sat in silence for a while, and then she made a move. I got the hint. We spent the night together. The next morning, I called my boss. I won't be in today, I said. Why not? He asked. I'm still on my date from last night, I replied. He laughed. The days following were unexpectedly quiet, as though the storm that had consumed my life had finally passed. The finality of my decision settled over me like a heavy but reassuring weight. I was done chasing answers and seeking closure from those who had broken my trust. I had moved on, not perfectly, not painlessly, but decisively. Darla and I continued to see each other. Her sharp edges softened with time, revealing a humor and depth that complemented her fiery nature. I discovered in her a shared resilience, a refusal to be defined by past mistakes. Our differences often led to spirited debates, but they became a source of growth rather than conflict. She challenged me in ways I didn't know I needed, and I found myself slowly, cautiously, allowing hope to bloom again. Jody's presence in my life faded like the final echoes of a distant storm. I received updates through Judy, but they felt more like distant news than personal revelations. I no longer felt anger, only a strange, muted gratitude for the lessons learned and the paths that led me here. My work at the dealership thrived. The Jacobsons became regulars, their enthusiasm for life a constant reminder of what a true partnership looked like. They often invited me and Darla for dinners, their support unwavering as they encouraged our relationship. It was at one such dinner that Dottie leaned over and whispered, "You've been through enough, Trey. Let yourself be happy." I still thought of my mother, of her misguided attempts to smooth over my life's jagged edges. Our relationship had improved, though her mention of Jody or the past still caused tension. But I'd learned to set boundaries, to choose the people and stories I allowed into my life. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I found myself on the Jacobsons' coach, parked outside Darla's home. She'd invited me over for lasagna, and as I stepped inside, I was greeted by the familiar scent of garlic and herbs. She smiled at me, her cast finally removed, and raised a glass of Chianti. "To new beginnings," she said softly. I clinked my glass against hers, the weight of the past lifting slightly with each sip. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to find out.
"Why won't you talk to me?" I asked. "I've decided not to interact with people I don't know," came the response. "I understand. I'll leave and go live with my husband's parents." They completely ignored me. I expected my mother-in-law to do so, but I never thought my father-in-law would treat me the same way. The reason for their change in behavior was my sister-in-law, who didn't like me and had returned home. Since her arrival, our once peaceful life has been turned upside down. Don't regret it, okay? You think I'll regret leaving? Think again. Feeling neglected, I packed my things and left my in-laws' house. Just 3 days after my departure, chaos erupted in their home. I met my husband at work. He worked in sales and often visited my office. I was his main contact. As we spent more time together in meetings, I began to like him. He was caring and kind, tall, and not conventionally handsome, but he had a charming personality and was well-liked. For some reason, he said he liked me too, and we started dating. During our conversations, he told me he grew up in a normal family with parents and a sister. I had lost my parents when I was young and grew up in an orphanage. It was a difficult life, but when we began dating, I shared my past with him. He said, "That sounds tough, but don't worry, I'll always be here for you." Not long after, he asked me to marry him. He always wanted our relationship to lead to marriage and quickly introduced me to his parents. When I told them about my upbringing in the orphanage, they listened carefully and reassured me it wouldn't affect our marriage. It made me really happy. They even said my background didn't matter in becoming their daughter-in-law, which made me feel really good. However, my sister-in-law, who was very close to her brother, seemed surprised, asking, "You grew up in an orphanage?" My husband had to scold her. Looking back, she probably didn't like me from the start, but I didn't think much of it at the time, assuming we were still getting to know each other. Before we got married, my husband and I discussed moving in with his parents. We considered it seriously, but I decided to keep my job. My husband was going to be transferred soon, and although I thought about quitting to move with him, my career was going well, and I had just been given more responsibilities at work. We discussed it and agreed that he would move alone after our wedding. I wanted to enjoy being newlyweds for a while. I even thought about visiting my husband during long weekends for mini vacations. Moving in with my in-laws right after getting married seemed a bit overwhelming, but my husband probably felt more comfortable living with them. He might have wanted us to live together to ease his mom's worries. Since I lost my parents when I was young, I had always wished for a family, so living with them didn't seem entirely bad. Besides, my in-laws had always been nice to me, and I grew to like them. It was tough juggling work and my role as a daughter-in-law, but having a family made me happy and complete. One day, my father-in-law came to me with a surprising request, marking the beginning of trouble in our seemingly happy living arrangement. It happened when my usually anxious mother-in-law, who often acted bossy towards my father-in-law, was out shopping. I was preparing to do some cleaning on my day off when my father-in-law asked to talk to me. "What's up?" I asked. "Well, I don't want my wife to find out, but I need to take time off from work." "Time off?" I asked, surprised. He explained that he'd been having problems with his boss and coworkers, and his health had deteriorated to the point where he had no choice but to take a break. My mother-in-law is a nice person, but she's always anxious and a bit overly worried. Living with them, I noticed how she tends to fret a lot, and my father-in-law walked on eggshells around her to avoid upsetting her. He had always been on the thin side, but lately, I realized he seemed to have lost some weight. It would have been nice if my mother-in-law genuinely cared about my father-in-law's weight loss, but when he took a sick day because of a cold, she said, "A cold? Everyone else at work is climbing the career ladder, and you're always taking days off for health reasons. That's why you're not getting promoted." Instead of being concerned, she tended to criticize him. He probably tried his best to keep going no matter how bad he felt, but his health got worse, and he secretly took time off to go to the hospital. He was struggling both mentally and physically, often leaving work early, being late, and calling in sick. There was talk about him needing to take a break from work, but he didn't want to upset my mother-in-law at any cost. If he suggested taking time off, she'd likely get really angry. Also, my father-in-law didn't earn much and relied on extra pay from working overtime. Taking time off would mean a significant drop in income. If he told my husband, he might inform my mother-in-law, so he came to me, asking if I could help with the bills. If I mentioned taking a break, she might even leave me, he said. Hearing that hurt. I was grateful to my in-laws, who had accepted me warmly despite my past in an orphanage, and wanting to support him, I decided to help him out during this tough time. Okay, I'll send you money every month. Use it for expenses. I'm really sorry. I'll try to get better soon and go back to work. Thank you so much. After that, my father-in-law continued to pretend to go to work while I sent money to his bank account for living expenses. My mother-in-law wasn't very thorough with checking her bank statements, so she didn't notice my transfers. He'd act like he was going to work, but instead, he went to a mental health clinic or went for walks in the peaceful mountains. Over time, he started looking better. I thought he might go back to work soon, but then something unexpected happened. After a fight with her husband, my sister-in-law returned to her parents' home. There's nothing like being back home. I thought I'd lose my mind if I stayed with that stupid husband of mine. I'll be here for a while. Can you make meals for me too? I knew from the start that my sister-in-law didn't like me. At our first family meeting, my husband was upset because she clearly showed her disapproval. During her wedding, she had a sour look the whole time and even told me straight out, "My brother looks great, but you? He could have married someone prettier." She openly judged me for being raised in an institution, saying it was embarrassing. I didn't have parents at the wedding. However, she got married before us and had already moved out, so I thought I wouldn't have to deal with her much. That's why I thought it would be okay to live with my in-laws. If she had still been living at home, I wouldn't have even considered moving in, knowing how she would treat me every day. I thought her stay was just temporary because of her marital problems and expected her to leave in a few days. Even though my mother-in-law was stern with my father-in-law, she had never been harsh towards me. I believed that if my sister-in-law made mean comments, my mother-in-law would defend me. But I was wrong. One day, when I came back from work, my mother-in-law's behavior seemed strange. "Is something bothering you?" I asked. She seemed distant, not talking to me like usual. When I asked her what was wrong, she said, "Did you know you've been talking about me behind my back?" What? I've never said anything bad about you. You've always been kind to me, and I'm really thankful. Why would I say bad things about you? You've been acting like the perfect daughter-in-law, but you've been talking behind my back. Whatever, she said, leaving the room. In the hallway, my sister-in-law was smirking. Looks like you're not in her good books anymore. Did your true colors come out? Being from an orphanage, your background really does matter, huh? It's best not to gossip about people. You know I haven't said anything bad about her. Oh, the neighbors seem to have heard everything. When I came back home after so long, they told me you've been talking badly about her all the time. What? Who are these neighbors? Well, it's been a while since I got married and moved out, so I kind of forgot their names. I never said any of that. Stop making things up. Oh, disrespectful. Mom, she's calling me a liar and being mean to me, my sister-in-law said as she walked into my mother-in-law's room. After that, my sister-in-law's behavior got worse. She claimed I told her to sleep in the hallway and take the last turn for a bath because she was just a guest. She complained to my mother-in-law about every little thing. Every time, I had to explain that I hadn't said or done any of it, but my mother-in-law seemed to believe my sister-in-law and be influenced by her. My sister-in-law stayed longer, making me wonder if she planned to stay forever. With all these worries, I went home feeling sad. "I'm back," I said. Before, my mother-in-law would warmly say, "Welcome back," but now it was quiet. "I'll start making dinner," I said, stepping into the living room. I was surprised. Usually, my sister-in-law would rush me to make dinner, but now my mother-in-law, father-in-law, and sister-in-law were eating sushi together. "Surprise," my sister-in-law said. "Oh, looks like someone who isn't really family is here. You were planning on having sushi, were you?" My mother-in-law kept eating without looking at me, watching TV. "If you wanted sushi, you should have told me." I came home right after shopping. I said, "Hey, I brought some stuff." I explained. No one said they wanted that," my sister-in-law replied, not even looking at me. "Hey Mom, Dad, I went out with my friends today and got some delicious pudding. Let's eat it together," my sister-in-law added, completely ignoring me. They all started eating the pudding. I was tired from work and didn't have the energy to argue, so I went to my room without eating. The next day, my sister-in-law said she was going out with friends and asked me to drive her to the station. I refused because it was a weekday and I had work. Even if we were going in the same direction, it was a different route, and she wanted to leave around noon. "I can't do it. Just take the day off, it's fine. Your cute little sis-in-law just wants a ride. She hasn't had a chance to relax since she got married, right? Can't you be a bit nicer to her now?" she said. "With all due respect, didn't you go out with friends last night after getting a late call? It seems like you've been going out almost every day since you came home. I have work. Please take the bus or train." My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were talking quietly, but I was done and left for work. However, that night, the event that made me decide to leave the house happened. I got delayed at work and came home after buying groceries, expecting to face some criticism. It was raining heavily when I left the office, and I got soaked just getting in and out of the car. I wondered what nasty surprise was waiting for me tonight, but when I got home, they were all eating takeout again, just like the day before. No hello, acting like they didn't see me, but I was used to it. I looked out into the courtyard from the hallway and saw something in the middle of the garden. Looking closer, I saw it was my stuff. My designer bag that I bought with my first paycheck, shoes that were a birthday gift for my husband, and even my work computer, all wet. I was shocked. My sister-in-law smirked and said, "Having strangers' things in the house grosses me out, so I threw them out." Flaunting a designer bag like that, how arrogant of you. Neither my mother-in-law nor my father-in-law said anything about her terrible behavior. Why didn't you stop her? Have I done something to you? Do you really believe her lies about me bad-mouthing you and bullying her? Aren't you upset with her for what she did? I asked. My mother-in-law avoided my eyes and stayed silent. Why won't you say anything? I asked again. I can't talk to strangers. I can't be friendly with someone who's not family, my mother-in-law replied, not even looking at me. My sister-in-law grinned, waiting for me to respond. Wait, where's my father-in-law? I've been the one supporting him during his time off. I've been the one handling the finances in this house. I did it out of gratitude, but shouldn't he stand up for me now? Surely he'd be on my side. Hoping for his support, I looked at him, but he walked past me without a word and went into his room. That was it for me. I see. I've had enough. Oh, are you upset? I'm sorry. Honestly, I never liked you from the start, you know, being from an institution and all. Just don't regret leaving, my sister-in-law said, as if daring me to leave. Good riddance, I replied. I packed my things and got ready to leave right away. Only my father-in-law seemed worried because he relied on me financially. But even he didn't try to stop me or speak up for me. I was done with his indifference. Although my husband's work assignment was far away, I just wanted to get out of that house as soon as possible. I quickly got into my car and drove to him. I never talked to my husband about any of this. I doubted my mother-in-law told him about my sister-in-law coming back home. If he knew, he would have reached out to me because he knows I don't get along with her. But my husband never mentioned anything about my sister-in-law in his calls or messages. I never doubted my husband's behavior before, but maybe she's manipulating him, feeding him lies about things. Even now, as I go to him, he might treat me the same way they did. My heart was heavy, feeling suspicious even toward my husband, whom I trust the most. If he's siding with them, maybe divorce is the only option. That's how distressed I felt. When I arrived at his out-of-state apartment, he hadn't returned yet, probably busy since it was the end of the month. As I waited, my husband came in energetically. "What? You're here. You should have told me you were coming. I would have come back sooner." "What a pleasant surprise," he exclaimed. "No, just seeing your face," I said with a big smile. Seeing him happy to see me after all that happened at my in-laws' house mixed with relief and humiliation, and I could have pulled back my tears. "What's wrong? Did I do something? Seriously, what's going on?" he asked, concerned. It seemed my husband had no clue about the treatment I endured at his parents' house. I gathered myself, knowing I needed to explain everything clearly to him. I started recounting everything: how I've been financially helping his father, who took medical leave without telling his wife, how his sister returned and was now staying at their parents' house, how she lied about me to his mother, turning her against me, how they treated me like an outsider, ignored me, and even ruined my belongings by leaving them out in the rain. Through tears and pauses, I poured out everything to him. Finally, I made it clear that I couldn't go back to that house ever again, and if he couldn't support me on this, I would want a divorce. My husband apologized for being too focused on work and not checking in on me more often. He regretted his family's behavior towards me. He assured me I didn't have to go back there or even talk to them again. Even if I forgave them someday, he was firm about cutting ties with his parents and sister. He also promised not to provide any more financial aid to his father. That night, I felt a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. The tension I'd been carrying melted away, and I slept peacefully by his side. After leaving my in-laws' house, I never went back. Commuting to my husband's out-of-state place wasn't practical, but I had already talked to my company about working remotely. My job didn't require me to be in the office all the time, and many of my colleagues worked from home too. Although I still had to visit the office a few times a month, some colleagues lived even farther away, so working remotely wasn't a problem. Living with my in-laws and dealing with my sister-in-law's bullying, I hadn't truly experienced married life. But now, we could finally live like newlyweds. As I set up my remote workstation, as expected, my sister-in-law contacted me. It turned out that the day after I left their house was my father-in-law's payday. My mother-in-law usually takes out a certain amount and transfers it to their household account, but this time she couldn't. It was only then that she realized I had been helping them financially during my father-in-law's time off. "Hey, why didn't you tell me you were covering the living expenses?" he asked. "My father-in-law asked me not to, saying he didn't want you to know, so I kept it to myself. Anyway, we're running out of money for living expenses, and there's no one to cook or do laundry. The place is a mess. As his wife, you need to come back and take care of these things and send money quickly." How heartless. I already told you, didn't I? I have no intention of going back to that house or being treated like your maid. Why should I help people who hate me, ruin my things, and treat me like this? Aren't you his wife? Without your help, we can't pay the bills or even shop. That's exactly why I'm saying it. I'm an outsider, so it's none of my business, right? I hung up, ignoring my sister-in-law's complaints. She and my mother-in-law kept bothering me with calls and messages, but I ignored all of them. Even after my husband returned from work, they kept calling persistently. When my husband finally answered, he told them firmly, "I will forgive you for how you treated her, and I'm not sending her back to you. I'm not coming back either. I don't see you as my family anymore. Leave my wife alone, or you'll regret it." Considering my sister-in-law adored her brother, and my mother-in-law heavily relied on him, they were probably shocked. A few days later, I got a call from my father-in-law. He said living with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law was getting too hard and begged me to continue the financial help. I'm grateful they accepted me when I married, despite growing up in an orphanage. But they didn't support me when I needed it, despite all the financial help I provided. I don't owe them anything. Why should I help those who joined others in ignoring me? I'll never assist you again. And with that, I ended the call. Later on, my persistent mother-in-law and sister-in-law shamelessly showed up at my workplace. Since I was already working remotely and had a bad feeling about them, I had informed my company about the situation. Security was alerted right away. They caused a scene, demanding that the company make me send money back home. When my husband heard about it, he said, "Report them to the police." My colleagues were supportive, saying, "I can't believe you had to live with those people. Focus on your remote work with your husband." As for my in-laws, my father-in-law's health declined under the pressure from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, and he eventually quit his job. My sister-in-law tried to return to her husband's family, but he refused to take her back. The town quickly learned about her drama at my workplace, causing an uproar. At her in-laws' place, the real reason for their fight was her affair, and this incident added to their problems, leading to an immediate decision to divorce. Left without a home, my in-laws and sister moved to a cheap apartment, managing with part-time jobs. As for my husband and me, we were finally enjoying peaceful days, feeling mentally and physically fulfilled. Recently, we found out we're expecting a child, and we couldn't be happier. We're eagerly awaiting the day we meet our baby, cherishing our time together.
Title: At a bookstore cafe, she claimed to be meeting a friend. When I walked over with her lover's wife, their book club turned into a scene no one expected. When Emily kissed me goodbye that evening, her smile seemed genuine, but her eyes carried a flicker of something else, something she tried to mask. "I'm just meeting a friend to discuss the latest book," she said casually, grabbing her purse and heading out the door of our charming brownstone in Brooklyn, New York. At first it sounded harmless, like any other Thursday night, but I couldn't ignore the unease that had been building for weeks. Emily had been distant lately, always preoccupied, her phone glued to her hand and perpetually face down on the counter. Her once regular chatter about work had dwindled into vague responses, and her laughter, which used to light up the room, felt forced, almost rehearsed. That night, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to her book club than she was letting on. It wasn't just the way she avoided eye contact when I asked simple questions, or how she rushed to silence her phone whenever a notification came in. There was something about the faint perfume she wore, a fragrance she hadn't used before, and the extra time she spent getting ready for these so-called meetings. As she walked out the door, I glanced at the kitchen counter and noticed something small but striking: a bracelet. It was elegant, with a unique design, and I knew for certain it wasn't hers. That moment felt like the start of a thread unraveling, a thread I couldn't ignore. Something about Emily's story didn't add up, and deep down I knew I had to find out the truth. As I sat in the living room of our Brooklyn apartment watching the evening light fade behind the skyline, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with Emily. Over the past few months, I'd noticed subtle but undeniable changes in her behavior. It wasn't anything huge at first, just small shifts that made my stomach twist with unease. Her once open and easygoing nature had become guarded. She started taking secretive phone calls in another room, her voice lowering to a whisper every time someone called. At first, I brushed it off. She was busy with work, or maybe meeting friends I hadn't heard about. But then came the unexplained absences. More often than not, she'd leave the apartment at odd hours for these vague meetings or events that I couldn't fully trace. She'd return hours later, acting like everything was fine, but there was always something about her that seemed distant, almost unreachable. It was as if she was physically there, but emotionally she was miles away. I wanted to believe it was just stress from work or life in general, but deep down, something told me this wasn't just stress. This was different. One evening, as she was getting ready to leave again, she casually mentioned a book club meeting, a typical harmless excuse, one that should have made me think nothing of it. But I felt the sudden weight of her words. Her tone was too rehearsed, and the way she said it, almost like a script she'd memorized, sent a cold chill down my spine. I tried to dismiss it, but as she reached for her bag, I saw something that made my heart race. Her phone buzzed with a message, but before I could even catch a glimpse of the screen, she quickly swiped it away and tucked the phone into her purse. The speed with which she did it, the urgency in her actions, was enough to stop me in my tracks. In that moment, I realized that this wasn't just a simple book club meeting. Something else was going on, something she didn't want me to know. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, but the knot in my stomach was too tight to ignore. It was as if all the pieces were starting to fall into place, and I couldn't ignore the growing fear that I was losing her, and maybe losing her to someone else. The unease that had been building within me for weeks finally erupted when I made a discovery that I couldn't ignore. It happened on a random Tuesday morning when I was cleaning up the kitchen. As I was wiping down the counter, my eyes caught something gleaming underneath the sink. My wife's bracelet. It was a delicate piece, silver with a small, ornate charm hanging from it. At first I didn't think much of it, assuming it was just misplaced. But as I picked it up, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. This wasn't a bracelet she normally wore. I had never seen it before, and it didn't match any of the pieces she'd had in the years we'd been together. I could feel the weight of it in my hands. Something was off. I tried to dismiss it, convincing myself that I was just being paranoid. Maybe it was just a gift from a friend, or a recent purchase she hadn't mentioned. But deep down, the feeling of unease only deepened, nagging at the back of my mind like an unanswered question. Later that day, as I scrolled through my social media feed absent-mindedly, my eyes froze on a photo that hit me like a freight train. It was a picture of a dinner party, one I hadn't been invited to. In the shot, a woman I recognized, a familiar face from our neighborhood, was wearing the same bracelet, the one that had been sitting on my kitchen counter earlier that morning. My heart skipped a beat. She was married to Greg, a man I'd always felt uncomfortable around. There was something about him I couldn't put my finger on, an air of secrecy that made me question his intentions whenever he was near Emily. The realization hit me like a wave. The bracelet belonged to Greg's wife, and somehow it had ended up in my house. This wasn't a coincidence. It was the beginning of something far darker than I had imagined. My mind raced with questions. How had the bracelet gotten here? Was Emily involved with Greg, or was there another layer to this betrayal? I needed answers, and I knew the only way to get them was to confront the woman in the photo, and ultimately, confront my wife. This was the moment I couldn't ignore, the moment I decided to take action. The plan was simple. I would find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The discovery of the bracelet was like a key turning in the lock of a mystery I had been too afraid to face. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place, but I knew I needed more information. The woman in the photo, Greg's wife, was the only link I had to understanding how my wife's secret life was unfolding. I couldn't ignore the gnawing sense that something far worse than an innocent book club was happening behind my back. My heart raced as I dialed the number I had carefully copied from the social media post. When the phone rang, each second felt like an eternity. What was I about to uncover? When the voice on the other end of the line finally answered, I hesitated for just a moment before speaking. "Hi, I'm not sure if this is going to make sense, but I think I've seen you in a recent photo." I briefly explained how I had come across the picture of her wearing the bracelet in question and mentioned my concerns about the strange behavior I'd noticed in my wife. To my surprise, she didn't dismiss me outright or hang up. Instead, she listened in silence before confessing something that sent my heart into my throat. "I've been suspicious of Greg for a while now," she said, her voice tinged with pain. "He keeps disappearing for work dinners, but it doesn't add up. He's always evasive about the details. And then, when I saw him texting Emily recently, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on." Her admission was a shock, but in a strange way, it was also a relief. I wasn't alone in my doubts. She had been sensing the same betrayals, the same lies that had been eating away at me. Our suspicions were united, and for the first time, I felt like I had someone who understood the depths of what I was going through. We both needed answers, but neither of us was ready to confront our spouses alone. Together, we made a pact. We would meet in person, and once united in our shared betrayal, we would follow our spouses to the next book club gathering. It wasn't just about confronting them. It was about exposing the truth, whatever it might be, and holding them accountable for the lies they'd both told. As the day of our meeting grew closer, I felt a mix of dread and anticipation. I didn't know how I would react once I saw Emily with Greg, but I knew this was the only way forward. The stakes were higher now, and there was no turning back. The day of the confrontation arrived faster than I expected. The nerves in my stomach twisted into knots as I met the woman who had become an unexpected ally in this twisted mess. Together, we walked toward the bookstore cafe, a cozy, rustic spot in downtown Brooklyn that we both knew well. It was the kind of place you could lose yourself in, books lining the shelves, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee in the air, and the soft murmur of conversation around you. At first, as we entered the cafe, everything seemed ordinary. The hustle and bustle of the evening crowd made it feel like just another evening, another group of people lost in their own worlds. But then we spotted them, Emily and Greg seated in the back corner, too close for comfort. I froze for a moment as I watched them. Emily was laughing, genuinely it seemed, her head thrown back in amusement as Greg leaned in closer than any casual conversation would warrant. There was something in the way they interacted that sent a chill down my spine. The laughter, the closeness, the way her eyes sparkled as she looked at him. All of it screamed intimacy, something far beyond what she had ever shared with me. My mind raced as the truth hit me like a tidal wave. This wasn't just a book club meeting. It was something far worse, a betrayal I had never imagined in my worst nightmares. The woman beside me, Greg's wife, took a deep breath and made the first move. She walked up to their table without hesitation, and when they saw her approaching, their smiles faltered. Greg's eyes widened in shock, his hand freezing mid-air as though he were caught red-handed. He opened his mouth to say something, but before he could, she spoke, her voice trembling but firm. "Greg," she began, her tone sharp enough to cut through the tension in the room. "I know about you and Emily. Don't even try to deny it. I've seen the messages. I've heard enough to know that you've been lying to me for months." The cafe seemed to fall silent. The murmur of voices around us suddenly hushed, as all eyes turned to the scene unfolding at the table. Greg's face drained of color, his lips parted in disbelief. But before he could respond, I stepped forward, my eyes locking with Emily's. The shock on her face was immediate, but there was no time to waste. I couldn't hold back anymore. The betrayal was too raw, too devastating to ignore. "Emily," I said, my voice steady but filled with the pain of 1,000 questions. "I know everything. The book club, the late nights, the secretive messages. You've been lying to me. How long were you going to keep this up?" For a moment, she just stared at me, her lips pressed together as if trying to find the right words to justify her actions. The silence between us felt suffocating. The weight of the lies, the deceit, was hanging in the air, and there was no escaping it. Finally, she spoke, but her words didn't hold the same warmth they once did. I didn't want to hurt you, but I don't know how else to explain it," she whispered, her voice cracking under the pressure. The confrontation, which had begun with a single step into the cafe, had quickly escalated into something neither of us had anticipated. But it wasn't just about catching them in the act. It was about reclaiming the truth, about understanding why the people we loved had turned their backs on us. Together, the two of us, united by the same betrayal, stared at the faces of our unfaithful spouses. No more lies, no more pretending. This was the reckoning. The tension in the cafe was palpable. The once bustling bookstore had transformed into an arena of raw emotions, with all eyes on the four of us. As the confrontation unfolded at the table, the quiet hum of conversation began to fade, replaced by the soft whispers of patrons who couldn't help but eavesdrop. It wasn't just a conversation. It had become a spectacle. Each word we spoke, each accusation thrown into the air, seemed to hang over the room, creating a thick, suffocating atmosphere. The murmurs among the cafe-goers grew louder, punctuated by stolen glances and the occasional gasp as they witnessed a betrayal unraveling in real time. Some pretended to look away, but it was impossible to ignore the scene in front of them. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked at Emily and Greg, their faces flushed with embarrassment and guilt. But what was even more painful was the awareness that we weren't alone anymore. Our private, painful moment had been turned into public humiliation. It was no longer just about confronting the lies we had lived with. It was about the shame that now soaked the air, turning our pain into something for everyone else to witness. People tried to act like they weren't watching, but their eyes were everywhere. I could hear them whispering behind their coffee cups, exchanging looks that only deepened the ache in my chest. My anger surged, but I knew we had come too far to stop now. The truth had to come out, even if it meant we were exposed. Just as I thought we'd reached the breaking point, the unexpected happened. A voice, calm yet heavy with authority, cut through the tension. A woman who had been sitting at the far end of the cafe stood up, her expression unwavering as she made her way toward us. She was older, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and she had the air of someone who had seen more than her fair share of drama in public places. As she approached, I couldn't help but notice the way Greg stiffened, his eyes darting nervously. "I couldn't help but overhear," she said, her voice steady, but with an edge of concern. "But I think you're all missing something important here." The cafe fell silent as all eyes turned to her. My stomach dropped as I tried to read her, but she seemed oddly calm, even sympathetic. She locked eyes with Greg before continuing. "I don't know if you're aware," she said, her words cutting through the tension like a knife. "But I know exactly who you are. And I know exactly what you've been doing." I stared at her, confused, as Greg's face drained of color. This wasn't just another concerned patron stepping in. This was someone who knew Greg and, more importantly, knew something I didn't. "What are you talking about?" Greg muttered, his voice barely audible, but his unease was palpable. The woman didn't hesitate. She looked at Greg, then at Emily and me, her gaze full of compassion as she spoke the words that shattered what little was left of my world. "You see, I've been following this little soap opera for months now. Greg isn't just having an affair with your wife. He's been doing this for a long time. And worse, there's someone else involved in this mess. Someone you don't know about yet. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. I turned to Emily, my eyes searching hers for any explanation, but she could only stand there, stunned, as the full weight of the situation began to sink in. The cafe-goers around us shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what would come next. The woman continued, her voice steady as she dropped the final bombshell. There's another woman involved, a third party, someone even more dangerous to your lives than you think. Greg has been playing both sides, and I'm afraid it's about to get a whole lot messier. Her words hung in the air, each syllable adding another layer to the web of lies that had been spun around us. I felt my legs buckle as the truth kept spinning out of control. Not only had my wife betrayed me, but Greg had dragged even more people into this nightmare. The cafe, once a place of warmth and comfort, now felt like the epicenter of a catastrophe I couldn't escape from. The cafe, which had once been a quiet haven for book lovers, now felt like a war zone. The heavy silence that followed the shocking revelation of Greg's double life hung in the air, suffocating and unbearable. In the aftermath of the public drama, the couples were left standing, stunned and shaken. Emily and Greg, their faces pale and their eyes filled with disbelief, had no words to defend themselves. The evidence was irrefutable. There was no way to cover up the lies any longer. The truth had been laid bare in front of strangers, in a place that once felt safe and familiar. Both of them tried to speak, their voices wavering with embarrassment and guilt, but no one was listening. The damage was done. Their attempts to justify their actions fell flat, their words lost in the whirl of emotions that had erupted in the cafe. With their heads low, they left separately, unable to face the people they had betrayed. As they disappeared through the cafe doors, their reputations in tatters, the weight of the moment lingered. For me, the flood of emotions was overwhelming: anger, sorrow, and a deep sense of loss. But as I watched them walk away, I realized something profound. There was no going back from this. The lies had torn everything apart, and now we were all left to pick up the pieces. The scene had quieted down, the whispers of the cafe patrons slowly dying down as they returned to their own lives. Yet in the stillness of the cafe, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. With the lovers gone, I turned to the one person who had, in some strange way, become my ally in this war: Greg's wife. She was standing beside me, her face pale, her eyes red from the tears she had tried to hide. But there was something in her gaze that mirrored my own pain, an understanding, a shared grief that only those who have been betrayed can truly comprehend. We both sat down at a nearby table, the silence between us at first heavy, but gradually a sense of connection formed. We were both victims in this twisted story, both crushed by the weight of the lies we had been fed. I could feel the tremor in her voice as she spoke, her words full of sorrow, but also an unexpected strength. "I never saw it coming," she said quietly, staring down at her hands. "I thought I knew him, Greg, thought we were happy. But I guess I was living in a fantasy." She let out a shaky breath, wiping away a tear that had escaped. "And now, I don't even know who I am anymore." Her words hit me hard, and for a moment, I found myself at a loss for what to say. There was a deep ache in both of us, a shared pain that no one else could understand. Yet, as we sat together in that cafe, something shifted. I didn't feel as alone as I had just moments before. We were two strangers brought together by the same betrayal, two souls left broken but not defeated. "I don't have all the answers," I said after a long pause. "But I know I can't keep living like this. I have to move forward, find some kind of peace, even if it's just one step at a time." I looked at her, my eyes meeting hers with a quiet resolve. "I can't let the lies define." She nodded, her eyes filled with both sadness and something else. Hope, perhaps. "I think I need to do the same." she said softly. I don't know where to start, but I can't let this destroy me. I've lost so much already, but I have to rebuild. There, in the quiet aftermath of the confrontation, the two of us found a strange comfort in each other's company. Neither of us knew what the future held, but in that moment, we both understood something crucial. We had the power to move forward, to reclaim our lives, and find strength in our independence. As the cafe's front door closed softly behind us, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of finality. The scene in the bookstore cafe had been chaotic, raw, and painful, but it had also brought a sense of clarity I had never expected. The weight of the confrontation was still heavy on my chest, and the silence between the lover's wife and me was not one of comfort, but of shared understanding. Yet as I stepped into the cool evening air, the burden of the lies and betrayal that had haunted me for so long seemed a little lighter. There was no happy ending, no neatly tied-up resolution that could erase the pain. My marriage was over, the foundation shattered beyond repair, and I was left with the ruins of a life I had once known. But as I walked away from the cafe, I found myself reflecting on something new, something unexpected. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. I wasn't tied to the lies anymore. I wasn't shackled by the false promises and secrets that had haunted our home. The clarity that had come with the truth wasn't a relief from the pain, but it gave me something far more powerful, a sense of direction. I didn't need to look back anymore. The life I had built, the marriage I had once held so tightly to, no longer defined me. I had a new understanding of what I deserved: honesty, respect, and a relationship built on trust. I had learned, through the wreckage, that I deserved better than the deception I had been living in. There was no fanfare, no dramatic conclusion, but walking away from that cafe felt like the first step toward healing. I could hear the hum of the city around me, a reminder that life would go on. But now, I was no longer tethered to the past. I was moving forward, and for the first time, I knew where I was going. As the night sky grew darker and the city lights flickered on, I thought back to the words I had spoken earlier in the cafe. I can't let the lies define me anymore. I had meant them then, but now I understood them fully. The truth had unraveled in the most unexpected way, and while it wasn't the ending I had wanted, it was the one I needed. It wasn't a perfect resolution. There was no reconciling with Emily, no rebuilding of what had been lost. But in a strange, twisted way, it was a release. I was no longer holding on to a broken promise. The page had finally turned. I walked into the night, the echo of my steps against the pavement, a reminder that the story was over. It was time to begin a new chapter, one where I could rewrite my own future, unburdened by the shadows of the past. And while the pain of betrayal still lingered, it no longer had the power to control me. I had faced the truth, and in doing so, I had freed myself from the chains of my old life. Thank you for being a part of this story with me. If it moved, you please give the video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to Narrative Stories. I've noticed many of you who enjoy these stories aren't subscribed yet by subscribing. You're not just following channel. You're becoming part of a community that values deep, meaningful storytelling. Let's continue exploring these heartfelt journeys together. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you won't miss our next story.